Okay, so let's begin with a roll call, if we may. Angela, can we do that?
Marcia Aaron.
Here.
Connie Ballmer is absent. Peter Bragdon.
Here.
Andrew Colas.
Here.
Helen Ford.
Here.
Joe Gagne.
Here.
Lisa Horniker.
Here.
Ross Carey.
Here.
Chair Lillis.
Here.
Laura Lee McIntyre.
Here.
Jimmy Murray.
Here.
Vice Chair Ralph.
Here.
President Schill.
Yep, here.
Mary Wilcox.
Here.
And Catherine is taking a final.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, let's, we have a quorum, of course. Let's first consider the minutes. There are two sets from September 2019, which you received earlier. We need to have a motion to approve or adjust.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second? Does anyone have any comments or adjustments they want to offer for the minutes? None? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay, we will begin, as we always do, with our public comment session. And we are, and I will apologize as I do each time if I do something terrible to your name. I'm very sorry about it. So I think the first, and you recall that we call first the public comment sections or sessions or people who are directly related to the content of the board meeting. And then if we have time, we'll go to the rest of the public comment agenda. So let's begin with Jessica Nafee. Jessica, can you, oh, thank you. And Jessica is, please have a seat, Jessica, right there. And Jessica is a graduate student, I don't know in which area.
Political science.
Aha. And Jessica wants to comment on the tuition and guaranteed tuition idea that we will discuss later today. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. So I just wanted to comment, especially with this guaranteed tuition idea that's going to be over a number of years, on what type of transparency and accountability are going to be built into this tuition idea, particularly if things like fees start to go up to account for. We already are discussing housing going up on campus. There have been numerous incidences where programs and departments on campus are becoming more reliant on I-fee funds that are paid directly by the students to make up for cuts coming from the general fund when tuition can't make up for that money. So what type of accountability and transparency does the board plan on putting into these to make sure, as many of you come from a business background understand, you need to have those things to make sure that everything is being funded properly and everything is functioning properly, and not to become reliant on things like I-fee budgets, which come directly from the students and are not always complete, that's a lot of money to have to make up for the students. We're already looking at having to make increases because just like the university, the I-fee has been in deficit the last few years and trying to make up for that. So how would you plan or think about that transparency, that accountability that you need to build in so you don't find other ways to get that money from the students when it's not coming directly out of the tuition? And that's my biggest fear when we're making these decisions, is that it's just going to end up putting more burden on the students, but just calling it a different type of fee or a different type of housing allowance or so on. So I just wanted to know what you thought about that and how you plan on accounting for that.
Thank you very much for your comments. We don't normally comment about comments, but I will tell you that we think this decision about whether or not to have guaranteed tuition is one of the most important decisions this board will be involved in. And so we're trying to make sure we allocate however much time is required for us to answer your questions and our own. So your questions are well thought through. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next person on the list is Kurt Wilcox, Kurt, are you, there you are. And for those of you that don't know, Kurt used to be a trustee. He's a retired University of Oregon employee. And Kurt would like to talk about proposed presidential bonus. Welcome.
Hello. Thank you, Chuck. That just takes my first paragraph away. Thank you. I appreciate that. I do have a nearly 50-year association with this university. I graduated from it, taught at it, worked at it, sent my children to it, and then retired from it. So I want to be clear that the University of Oregon is something I care deeply about, and the people who work and study here as well. The last time I spoke to this board was in May. I joined dozens of others in objecting to the proposed sizable tuition increase that was being considered at that time. I also objected to the fact that $11 million in budget cuts was falling disproportionately on community outreach programs, and in particular, the Labor Education and Research Center, which had been targeted to lose $488,000, fully 68% of its budget. I'm here today to urge you not to approve a $100,000 bonus for President Schill. I do so for two main reasons. First, given the U of O's financial situation this year, the board will be sending absolutely the wrong message to the campus, local, and wider communities by tossing $100,000 to President Schill for simply meeting performance standards. After all, the Chronicle of Higher Education according to them, the President Schill is already the 38th highest paid public university president in the country. Awarding President Schill this bonus will hurt the U of O's credibility. We already struggle to secure the funding we need from the legislature. What conclusion should legislators reach when they see us using tuition dollars in this way? For that matter, how should those who provide the tuition dollars feel about it? Wouldn't it be smarter to invest this regularly occurring $100,000 in the Labor Education and Research Center or any of the programs that were deeply cut in the past year? Instead of projecting a sense of shared sacrifice, this board is telling the university community, we do not feel your pain. The second reason I'm asking you to reject this bonus is because of the way President Schill and the university administration have treated classified workers and graduate employees in contract negotiations this year. They threatened for nearly a year to make it more difficult for these workers to access needed health care benefits and to maintain a reasonable standard of living. They belittled their union's negotiators and their contract proposals. They dragged out negotiations 3 to 4 months beyond the point at which the university knew with certainty how much funding would be available from the state. And they pushed both groups and the entire university to the brink of a strike twice before dropping their worst demands and settling on terms that were largely those proposed by the unions. The board may be pleased with President Schill's performance in fundraising and in several program areas, but his dealings with classified workers, graduate employees, and students concerned with the cost of their education are marked by indifference, disrespect, and a willingness to balance the budgets on their backs. This is not bonus-worthy performance. Last year, President Schill deflected criticism of his bonus by using it to establish a scholarship fund, a very worthy endeavor. Perhaps you intend to do something similar to that this year. It would be much better, though, in my estimation, if you simply thank the board for its confidence in you and then decline to take any additional compensation as long as the U of O continues to struggle with its finances. That would demonstrate real leadership and a real commitment to this university community. I hope you and the board will consider taking that route. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kurt. The next speaker who has signed up is Ellen Galoli Korea, is that correct? Is that even close to correct, I guess? Oh, okay. Welcome. Please have a seat, Ellen.
Hello. Good morning.
And Ellen is a graduate student, I believe?
Yes, graduate student in theater, obviously. I've asked Ellen Galuli Kress, and it was a typo, autocorrect, strikes again, to sign up on my behalf. My name is @shillbot_3000 at www.twitter.com. And I'm here to give you, I've signed up to talk about the $100 million that you're giving yourselves for the housing, but I also want to remind you about the last 5 years of Shill's reign as Shillbot_3000. I'm here before you in a excellent balance of power scenario where I, at Shillbot_3000 on Twitter.com, get 3 whole minutes to give you the true 5-year report before my counterpart gets a whole 45-ish minutes later today to give his own report. The person who gave me life, unfortunately, must leave right after this comment as they are giving a final at 10:15 a.m. So I apologize for missing your own speech at Shillbot, regular Shill. It's truly a diabolical plan for this board to have this meeting at finals week. What an excellent day to be a duck, except for those architecture professors who were age discriminated against and settled for hundreds of thousands of dollars just now. What an excellent day to be a duck, except for the student collective, the Black Student Task Force, and other activist groups on campus who are being ignored in their demands for justice. What an excellent day to be a duck. My Twitter feed is no longer chronological, but I would like to let you know, remind you of the activities in the past 5 years. For example, University of Oregon covering up hate crimes in the past year. The controversy in 2017 with Nancy Schertz, a law professor showing up in blackface, and I, at Shillbot_3000, refused to take a stand on it. Federally got for disability access. Remember when the forms for disability access weren't actually accessible on the internet, on the website provided for students who are trying to get their education? I also like to take credit for union organization, reference to my 2017 open mic about non-tenure track faculty. And unfortunately, the legislature doesn't trust me anymore because I keep coming with open palms and asking for money, but then turning around and accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bonuses. And I'd like to remind you about a quote that I just recently said at a faculty senate. One of the things that has produced our fragility is that we, unlike virtually all of our peer schools, tend to heavily unionize in the faculty as well in the staff and as well in the graduate employees. It means we lack some of the flexibility, some of the tools, some of the levers that other universities have. I'd like to clarify the point that I gave. When I refer to my peer institutions, I want to be clear that my reference is to the dream peers of my next job. After I accept this $100,000 bonus, then I can go out into the great beyond and find my next job at Harvard or other places that are private that do not have unions. And I'd like to remind you of my campus culture principles: honesty, transparency, hence you can see my wires, respect, and grace. But I did sign up to speak on behalf of the $100 million given to the greatest company in the world. Oops, I mean the greatest sport. I mean the permanent home to the Olympic trials. Oops, I mean the hardworking students on this campus. In researching, my progenitor discovered that under the cheapest meal plan that only gives you options of one dining hall at which, workers who are responsible for their own shift meals must provide for themselves, only 7 out of 39 housing options come under our own University of Oregon calculations for the cost of living in Eugene. And I said to myself, you know what we need to do? We can't stop there. Right then, I vowed I wouldn't rest until all of the options afforded students who come to the University of Oregon came in over the price of living in Eugene. Obviously, if students have a problem with that, they can acquire a second or a third or a fourth or a fifth job, sacrificing their education. Giving ourselves this gift of 100 million smackaroos and leveraging it with increases to housing costs in the future is only just and fair and equal, because everyone gets to inflated cost of living. Besides, we can't have the world's athletes, scholars, living for 2 weeks in concrete boxes in 2021. I'm wearing bright flashing lights, so you pay attention to me. And I know it's silly and I know it's ridiculous, but there are issues on this campus that you all have been ignoring. So I have to come to you dressed up like a robot for you to listen to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to continue to move through the list. Let's see. I think this is it Jenny Saunders or Johnny? I can't quite read the writing. Johnny, thank you. Please join us. Johnny is a grad student, and you would like to comment on the housing bond, I take it?
Yes,
Welcome.
yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you.
In which area are you a graduate student?
Neuroscience.
Neuroscience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for having me this morning. On December 2nd, 2015, in the board minutes from this board, it stated that the findings from the feasibility and market demand study final report clearly state that the University of Oregon should renovate rather than replace Bean, Hamilton, or Walton. The findings show that the cost of replacement would create prohibitively expensive room and board rates relative to renovation. And that's referring to a report that this board commissioned that was assessing the feasibility, need, and cost of future housing renovations. In the following board meetings on December 1st, 2016 and December 7th, 2017, the project is still referred to as Hamilton renovation. And then in June 7th, 2018, this current plan, the Housing Transformation Project, was introduced with no further reports that are available from the Housing Department website or anywhere else that I was able to find that changed that conclusion. The two reasons for the proposal as it stands now that were given are housing demand and recruitment. A third reason that was initially presented with this plan that has been removed from subsequent discussions of the plan has been hosting events from around the community and around the country. As far as the housing demand goes, the feasibility and market demand study estimated that we would have 23,198 undergrads in 2021. For that, we would need a plan that brought our total bed number to 5,100 as this plan does. Currently, there are 18,903 undergrads enrolled in the University of Oregon, or 5,000 fewer than were estimated by the plan that said we needed new housing. As far as recruitment goes, the reason that was given as far as like making a brand new building was that we know what housing students want and we know what housing students expect. This is, of course, not an empirical statement, but a statement based off of perceptions. But when instead, in that same feasibility report, students were asked about their perceptions of their housing, and I'm quoting from the report, moreover, the students in the focus groups in the resident hall feasibility and market demand study did not express alarm or disdain over their existing housing. They said the housing is what they expected to live in as freshmen, that the housing was not brand new as of secondary importance. Meanwhile, 62% of that focus group said that cost was the primary reason that they chose to come to the University of Oregon and the primary thing that drives their housing decision. So what changed in the spring of 2018, where suddenly this board forgot the results of the report that it commissioned? The only thing that's different is the price tag and the date that phase one is supposed to be complete. In the initial proposal, the presenter said that they'd like to have the first phase completed by August of 2021, but school starts in September. So what starts in August of 2021 that was so pressing that we needed to change fundamentally the housing project that was before the board in the preceding 3 meetings? So I want this board to have to answer for why it is spending $500,000 per new bed when housing demand is far lower than expected, cost of attendance is at an all-time high, students' stated preference is against this plan. In the ASUO statement on tuition increases, They said that too much money is being spent on giving students a lavish lifestyle when instead they would prefer that the cost of attendance remain low. And so I think if this board were to pass this bond proposal today without having commissioned any new reports that change the conclusions of the previous report that's available, that says that costs will be prohibitively high, that the board will be derelict in its duty by going forward with an unadvertised double-digit increase in cost of attending the University of Oregon. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next person signed up is, I think it's Hannah Lynch, but I can't read the handwriting. Oh, I got close enough. Welcome, Hannah. Please come have a seat. Hello.
I'm glad to be here. I'm grateful that you're all listening right now and opening up this discussion. I'm really grateful for that. I'm an undergrad student. I'm a senior.
Hannah, could you get the microphone just a little closer?
Closer?
Pull
Sure.
it forward.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah. I recently heard about this proposed bonus, and when I hear that President Schill could be getting this bonus, I feel upset and frustrated and exploited because there are students who are struggling to pay their tuition. The grad employees just had a huge battle to retain their health care coverage. And as we've just heard, there are students who are struggling to pay for housing. So to me, I feel really shocked at hearing this because there just seems to be a huge gap between what students and what grad employees need and what this board is willing to do for them. And thank you. So much of like the ethos and advertising of the university is that they care about community and they care about connection and they care about equity. And so many of our studies are about equity and about understanding resource allocation and being mindful about privilege. And it's important that we practice our values, especially as the representatives of these studies. It's really important to all be responsible about the role that we have in this. And so, President Schill, I really ask that you don't accept this bonus because I think that it's inappropriate and it would communicate that a lack of care for students and grad employees. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the next speaker that is signed up is Vera Cebulski. Welcome.
Hello, I'm an officer of administration in the Lundquist College of Business, and I work in student services, and I have to thank the board for listening to all the student input today, and I appreciate you doing that. However, I am delighted to be here in my capacity as a member of the OA Council, a team of 8 who represent OAs across campus. Who are OAs and what do we do? Our primary constituents hold a variety of positions, including supervisors, managers, administrators, confidential office workers, advisors, counselors, and professional academic support. We contribute to the mission of the university by managing programs, people, resources, and facilities, delivering professional service and support to enhance students' educational, social, and personal growth, and providing long-range strategic planning, leadership, and direction to the departments and institution as a whole. How many of us are there? Out of a total of 6,662 employees at UO, OAs account for 1,493 employees. We differ from faculty and classified staff in several ways, and the main difference is We are currently the only unrepresented professional employee group on campus. I have shared the OA Council's goals and contact information with Angela Wilhelm, and she'll pass that along to you. And our key goals are seek out what OAs want to hear and talk about, advocate for supervisory training for department and unit heads and other faculty serving in administrative roles, partner with existing efforts to advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in hiring processes, create and mobilize subcommittees to enhance our effectiveness, and partner with other employee groups to work on common concerns and causes. The OA Council welcomes board members to any of our working meetings, we meet twice a month, so that we can continue to discuss ways that OAs can contribute to the university's success. Time permitting, my colleague Thor Mikkelsen, a fellow OA Council member, will share updates and summarize OA Council goals and achievements. Thank you for your time, and I hope to see some of you at an upcoming OA working meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the next speaker is Thor Mikkelsen. Welcome, Thor.
Good morning. My name is Thor Mikkelsen.
Sorry.
I'm the production manager for the School of Music and Dance. I also have the opportunity to serve as the vice chair of the OA Council, and I am honored to be speaking to you today. On behalf of the OAC, I would like to highlight one of its most impactful achievements over the last few years. As it has been stated previously, the OA Council is an elected body which works to promote, advocate for, and represent the interests of over 22% of the university's full-time professional workforce in their efforts to further facilitate the research, educational, and service missions of the university. In order to be effective, responsive, and accountable in this work, the OAC launched a climate survey and listening tour beginning in 2017, which culminated in a 2018 report that has been published and further presented to senior university leadership, many of whom are present today. I have asked that the 2018 report be made available to the board as well. The survey's response rate was a staggering 39%. After exhaustive analysis of the data, 7 key topics of concern were identified, of which the following are included: compensation, professional development, connecting with university leadership, representation, and shared governance. These few findings have set the tone and goals of the OAC for the foreseeable future. Also found in the responses was the data point that 57% of respondents identified that they are under the impression that university leadership does not highly value their work. This point has been the topic of President Schill's last 2 visits with OAs during our open meetings, wherein he has offered and opened honest and straightforward dialogue. For that, we are grateful. The OA Council will continue to advocate for the needs of almost 1,500 employees, and I would like to reiterate Vera's invitation for trustees to meet with us at an upcoming working meeting. We look forward to sharing our perspective, and we thank you for your work on behalf of the university.
Thank you. The next person signed up is David Eigel. Welcome back.
Well, thank you. It's at a minimum interesting and in some ways a pleasure to be back. The ecumenical Professor Dunn believed in and practiced racial integration. He was a man of great integrity and the highest intelligence. I have documented and pointed out to you that university archival records state that Professor Dunn was not a member of the Fraternal Order of the Klan in the 1920s, and that this record was omitted from the Dunn report, although it was included in a file cited by the report. Mr. Schill, I haven't received your explanation for this omission. My $25,000 offer to each of the historians who wrote the Dunn report for its successful defense has gone begging. The Klansman salesman claimed that the secret Jesuit priests ran the university while secretly sexually abusing the secret nuns of the U of O, and that the Pope would come to Washington, D.C. to take over the government. The salesmen were simply disingenuous money hustlers. They also advertised that there were Klan chapters that purchased Christmas gifts for needy black children. There actually were Klan chapters that played baseball games against all black baseball teams. 92 years ago today, the Eugene Guard reported that the University of Oregon Choir would be offering a free public performance in Latin of the St. Cecilia Mass. A translation into English was to be offered by Professor Dunn. Mr. Schill, why exactly do you believe that Dunn was anti-Catholic? And why did you make up lies about Dunn being associated with lynchings that never even occurred, and withhold timely delivery to the trustees of information discrediting the Dunn report? My research has exposed numerous serious misrepresentations of history that involve the U of O, such as the exhibit at the Museum of Natural and Cultural History. After complaining, I received a communication that denied that the exhibition claimed to represent accurate history. The portions of the exhibit dealing with Eugene, Dunn, and the Klan in the 1920s misrepresent and slander those who lived here. Because the exhibit is being presented in a U of O facility, the public is misled into believing that this dishonest representation of history is genuine. A recently published letter by museum director John Erlandson demonstrates his complete cluelessness as to the history and meaning of the Skinner's Butte cross burning. The cross burning was simply advertising employed by crooked fraternal order salesmen to attract attention. It was not the work of committed racists attempting to intimidate the black citizens of Eugene. In fact, these black citizens didn't exist. A member of Dunn's church asked me to give the trustees a message. She said, "Tell them we forgive them." Do you deserve forgiveness? What are you going to do? Thank you.
Thank you, David. The next speaker is the next speaker is Joe Tyndall. Joe, please join us. Okay, let's you've got the floor, Joe.
Okay.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. My name's Joe Tyndall. I've been a student under your old guys program for 6 quarters. Many students leave the U of O dumber than when they got here, and a lot more in debt. Maybe I'm a dinosaur, but I define gaining knowledge as developing a stronger connection with observable, verifiable, objective physical reality. If this board continues to allow teaching ideological narratives directly contradicted by observable, verifiable, objective physical reality, the U of O is not a foundry for knowledge. While there are pockets of quality remaining, particularly in the STEM fields, even these areas are being infected, and people walk on eggshells to avoid offending the social justice snowflakes. Companies are learning that employing social justice warriors is a bad idea. Hiring a graduate from a discipline that ends in studies is inviting a professional victim to disrupt the normal flow, and when confronted, to whine about oppression, file legal challenges, or invite intervention from regulatory authorities. Men are now refusing to mentor women because false #MeToo accusations are frequently used as a tool to destroy male executives to advance females to power. Who could have seen that coming? And don't these greedy white male boomers deserve punishment? The saying, "get woke, go broke," plays itself out industry by industry. Left-leaning media is laying off staff and closing doors as their ratings collapse. The Gillette man-bashing commercial has tanked their sales and stock value. Disney has decimated the Star Wars franchise by creating ideologically woke films passed with social justice cringe that insults their core audience. Star Wars merchandise is not selling, and the Galaxy's Edge theme park is vacant. Look at the polls. The Democrats' relentless anti-due process impeachment witch hunt, pushed by the social justice far left, has guaranteed Trump's reelection. The DNC is now nearly insolvent, while Trump has hundreds of millions in the bank from folks fed up with social justice political correctness. And the list goes on. That's objective physical reality, No amount of postmodernist doublespeak can change that. To buy into social justice, you must redefine words, deny history, ignore evidence, and disavow logical contradictions. For example, should biologically male trans women be allowed to crush females in women's sports? Ideologically driven willful ignorance is not a virtue. When students the U of O has trained to be victims discover their degree no longer opens doors, I hope they sue you for teaching this insanity. And I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we, in the interest of civility, I think we'll take a 5-minute recess, okay? And then we'll continue. That was the end of the people who had signed up for public comment. Great, thank you. The next part of our meeting deals with the ASUO and University Senate reports. Sabina is not here, right? Okay, so I think we'll pass on the ASUO report, and let's go directly to Elizabeth Scourin on the University Senate. Elizabeth is the University Senate president, and welcome, Elizabeth. And for the new board member, this is a standard report.
So thank you for inviting me to speak today. You can see my report is pretty bare bones. We've been doing a lot of work in the University Senate that has been focused on supporting the development and rigorous review of a couple of new undergraduate programs, including the new undergraduate program. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. The new undergraduate program in neuroscience. We have a couple of other undergraduate programs that are working their way through the system, including data science and bioengineering. As you know, you've probably gotten briefs on this. We have a pretty exciting new program template that's been developed by colleagues in the graduate school. It's being referred to as an accelerated master's program template, right? So developing the opportunity to have our undergraduate students be able to continue here for another year and earn a master's degree in that 5th year. So that's a pretty exciting program template that's really been going through some thorough review. I think the folks that are heading that up are doing a great job of being highly consultative, and I think the program template is really improved as a part of that. We've been meeting both with the administration and with select members of the Senate in the Senate Executive Committee on beginning to think through development of a policy for hiring academic administrators. And so that includes administrators like college deans, administrators such as the provost position, executive vice provost position, and some other academic leadership positions. So we had, toward the end of last year, Bill Harbaugh and I had been meeting with Mike and our last provost to have these conversations about developing some, regularizing a policy for hiring these kinds of important leaders. Developed some policy ideas last spring, presented them to the Senate, and now we're, I think, hard at work to try to finish developing that policy in collaboration and hopefully bring that to the Senate in early winter term. So a lot of consultation and collaboration on that. And I'm optimistic we'll get something that's good quality passed that folks are all can sign on to. We have a library committee, a subcommittee that's focusing on open access issues. They've launched, they're hard at work. I'm really impressed with the work that they're doing, and I know you've heard about that before. You know, we've been spending a lot of time in the Senate, actually over this summer and this fall, really just working on nuts and bolts of communication and trying to make sure that we're both getting communication in from faculty, OAs, classified staff, and students, and also then pushing out information from Senate and Senate meetings. We have begun to implement onboarding and orientation for senators. We're also going to be working together with members of the academic committees and academic council to build onboarding and orientation training for new committee members. So new committee members on the undergraduate council, the graduate council, and our other academically oriented committees, getting some regularized training to understand what their roles and responsibilities are, also how they're empowered to provide input and oversight into the work that we're doing on the academic front. So we're doing a lot of building there. We are in process of building out a new website, and we're just in the queue for having the personnel available to begin to build that out. So that'll begin in winter term, and we'll have a website that's a little bit more searchable, usable, but stay tuned for when that's going to get completed. And then I'd say the last thing I just want to make mention of is the engagement that I think we've been trying to facilitate, but I think we've had some pretty good partnership along these lines. Engagement between the Senate, the administration, and the board. And this includes things like monthly meetings that we have with President Schill and Provost Phillips, with Senate leadership. Those are quite productive and helpful. We also are having quarterly gatherings with the university senators, university academic committee chairs and members, and President Schill, again, just building opportunities for contact and conversation, and I think those are all good. We've been really pleased, Elliot Berkman and I, Elliot's vice president, have been really pleased with the board's willingness to take some time out when you're available to just meet with us, get to know what's happening in the Senate, and a number of you have been able to take some time to meet with us, so we appreciate that, and we'd like to continue those meetings through the rest of the year. So I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions that I can be helpful with. And if I can't answer them, I'll get the information for you.
Are there any questions for Elizabeth? Yesterday, you arranged lunch, various senators to join us for lunch in small groups, and I think I've heard from every trustee that those were terrific time. We learned a lot, and it was wonderful. We should do that as a regular. I should talk to the boss here. We should do that as a regular thing, Angela. So.
Well, I know that the board is really busy. You come in for a couple of days, and you're doing a lot of work, so it's difficult to grab time with you. But I think it's a very good thing for us to be thinking about making sure that we've got some regular contact between faculty and other individuals employed on campus and the board, just to be able to have those informal meetings and conversations about what's happening. I think you can get a feel for what's going really well on campus and areas of improvement that we can continue to work on. So we appreciate the board's willingness to do that and hope we can continue it.
Well, those are learning experiences for us. Any questions for Elizabeth? Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
And thanks for all your good work. As I said, Sabina is not here, the ASUO president. So let's move to the next subject, which is the president's report, and it will include an overview of 5 years.
So just want to get the PowerPoint set up, but let me do an introduction about this. So I'm not going to give a traditional, what I normally give as a traditional president's report. Patrick gave you a rundown about a lot of what's going on right now at the school. But what I thought I'd talk about and is during my president's report is this this report that we came out with, just prepared. So it's now been over 5 years since the Board of Trustees assumed leadership of the University of Oregon following the passage by the legislature of SB 270, which granted each of the 7 public universities in the state an independent board. And then what occurred next was the dissolution of the Oregon University system. Now, it would be an understatement to say that a lot has transpired over the past 5 years. A couple months ago, Chuck and Ginevra asked that we prepare a report for the board that recounted the experience of the University of Oregon under the independent governing board. The document that we prepared, which is available on the web, focuses on the accomplishments of the University of Oregon during this 5-year period, but importantly, doesn't overlook our challenges, some of the challenges that we are facing going forward. Now, each of you have a copy of the report, and my apologies for its length, but as I said, this has been a pretty busy period for the University of Oregon. Now, as the document states, the past 5 years have been a period of extraordinary improvement for the University of Oregon. As many of you remember, when you first took your seats on the board back in 2014, the University of Oregon was a very different school. It was a university, I wasn't here, but it was a university in disarray. 2 presidencies had prematurely ended. Its AAU status was in jeopardy. Many of its best faculty were leaving or seeking to leave. A Senate was in revolt, our university Senate, and a sexual violence scandal was making national news. I think all of us remember the Chronicle of Higher Education story that came out actually during my first year. The headline of that story, if anybody needs to remember, was "A Reputation at Risk." And that article described much of what was going on at the time with respect to our university. Now, as we conclude in the report that we've submitted today, the university has experienced extraordinary improvements over the last 5 years. We have made great progress strengthening the university's teaching and research excellence, in improving student success, in enhancing the experience of our students, and in promoting diversity and inclusion on our campus. Challenges remain. We talk about them a lot, and I'm not going to sugarcoat them. Challenges remain, most especially challenges with respect to our finances. And what I want to do now is I'd like to go through a slide deck which summarizes the high points of the report. But before I begin, I want to emphasize something. The progress that we have made is not the work of any one individual or even one group of individuals. It is shared amongst our entire community, most particularly our faculty, TTF and NTTF, and our graduate employees, who are the lifeblood of our teaching and our research missions at the university. Our classified staff, our OAs, who make it possible for the faculty to do their work and who independently support our students every day in their work. Our deans, who lead their units, and our senior administrators, who help lead the university as a whole. The University Senate, the group that embodies shared governance at our university. Our employee groups and our unions, who have collaborated in important ways with the administration over the past 5 years. Our alumni and our donors, who have provided us with the resources to support and make possible the achievements that we've accomplished. And of course, the Board of Trustees, who provided overall leadership and set very high expectations for the university, and then demanded accountability with respect to those expectations. So what I'd like to do is start by talking a bit about governance. But first, you can see these are the topics, the headings that I'm going to cover in this report. Why don't we move to the first slide? Let's talk about governance. All right, the Board of Trustees assumed much of the change at the university occurred before I ever set foot on campus. Much of the direction and much of the infrastructure was set up in that first year. The Board of Trustees assumed authority in 2014, obviously following SB 270 and the dissolution of OUS. And I think sometimes we forget how much work that took. I discover it every day, done by the board, but also by many of the vice presidents. We migrated or created new policies, right? We were almost like a new university. So we had to migrate, go through, update over 300 policies. We're still working on some of them, but that was a tremendous amount of work. We had to rewrite our bylaws. We had to rewrite our mission statement, which I understand took quite a bit of time. We had to establish functions on our campus that didn't exist. Shared services, a treasury, internal audit, just to name three. Tremendous amount of infrastructure. We earned a strong bond rating, something that has benefited us, something that continues to today. And of course, we set about the process of hiring a new president. Now, I came into office in July of 2015. Immediately, one of the first things that we had to do was hire new leadership at the university. I think there was no other way to put it, there was a leadership void at the university. Most of the deans were interim. Many of the senior administrators had vacancies in their offices or were run by interim leaders. So what we did is we had to then set our mind to hiring a new administrative and academic leadership team. 4 new vice presidents, 8 new deans, and a new provost. We also had to enhance our administrative infrastructure. This university, partly because we were not a separate university, but partly because of decades of underinvestment, we didn't have appropriate financial reporting. We didn't have data systems. I remember the question, my first day, actually it was not true, it was my transition. I asked Scott Coltrane, how many faculty do we have? And he couldn't answer it. And it took weeks to get the answer to that question. That's mind-boggling. We just didn't have the systems. We had virtually we had very little visibility into expenditures. And we would soon learn that each of our schools and colleges were spending more money than they had in revenue. But again, we didn't have the systems. So we had to create those systems. We had to establish new rules and policies, continuing. Delighted to work with the Senate on that. We also had a strategic plan that was unfinished and that embodied at the end 15 months of work, dozens and dozens of participants from our faculty, from our staff, from our students, from our graduate students, from our administrators. We've completed the Excellence Strategic Framework. We also were in the process of implementing for our CBA with United Academics. And that was a huge amount of work before I came, and then we went about implementing it. We rebuilt our relationship with the University Senate. When I came here, before I came here, I watched some meetings of the Senate on video. And I still came, but they were not pleasant meetings. And I said when I first came here, I said I believe in shared governance. And it has gotten better and better every year, more cooperative, more focused. And we've accomplished a lot together. Core curriculum, teaching evaluations, academic continuity, Title IX reporting. These are all important collaborations. We've certainly had our dust-ups, but we've also had our successes, and our relationship today is stronger than ever. We redesigned our IT infrastructure and technology, and that's one area where the board has been amazingly involved and helpful. Jessie Minton's group and folks right before her, we've developed a high-speed, high-performance computer network, which made possible the data analysis, made possible the research that is going on at this university, made possible the data science program that we talked about yesterday. We developed Link Oregon, a high-speed network between the major universities. When I came here, people said if you wanted to do research with OHSU, you needed to back up everything into a hard drive, get in your car, and go to OHSU to then download it. Now we can do it with Link Oregon. We replaced much of our infrastructure. As with anything, much needs to be replaced. As soon as you replace it, you go on a cycle needing to replace it again. We have made investments in cybersecurity. Not enough, but we've made investments, and we're safer than we've been. And Jessie has instituted Transform IT, a 5-year plan to rationalize in a collaborative way the different distributed IT departments. We have 29 IT departments, which are sort of independent entities on campus. And Jessie is in the process now of folding them together in a rational way that doesn't neglect the importance of independence and differentiation at the various levels. Let's talk about finance. All right, so when we came here, as I said, we were in a position, when I came here, we were in a position where every unit, or virtually every unit, was running a deficit. We had to step back and say, do we have the right funding model and the right funding? It might be obvious that the answer was no, but it was, what do we do? So we created a different funding stream and a different model. And, no model is perfect. We stopped the practice where revenue followed the students, which led to enormous levels as enrollment shifted, particularly from CAS to other units. What we saw was shifts in revenue that were harmful to CAS. And so what we ended up doing was setting up a new model of more centralized revenue distribution. We also took on the risk centrally of paying all tenure-related faculty members. And with that risk, we also took on the distribution of tenured faculty through a collaborative process, the institutional hiring plan process that the provost runs. And that plan starts with the academic departments. They give ideas for who they would like to hire, goes to the dean for vetting, comes to the provost, meets again with all of the deans, meets with faculty committee, and then makes final decisions. And that gives us a better sense, a better way of coordinating hiring on campus. It isn't just when someone dies or leaves, you get that same faculty slot back. Instead, we want to serve the best needs of the students and the needs of the university by putting our most valuable resource, a potentially permanent job with tenure, in the departments that need it the most and that have the greatest opportunity for growth and the greatest opportunity for excellence. We advocated at the state for better state funding. And you're always in this weird situation. We have had steady increase in state funding. We have gone from our PUSF, Public University Support Fund, we've gone from $49.1 million to $72.4 million over the 5 years. Most people would say that looks pretty good. That's a pretty good clip. But it's all about baseline. It's where you started, right? We started next to last in the 50 states. Now we're something like 38 in the 60 states. We are still below, in nominal terms, where we were in the PUSF in 2008. We were at $80 million, now we're at $72 million. In real terms, it's not even close, right? In real terms, including inflation, we're way behind. And if you look at the entire state of Oregon, and I say this many times, we are dead last in terms of the dollars that we get per student. We are second to last in terms of our AAU peers in terms of dollars per student. So state financing is extraordinarily low here, but we're making progress. We are making progress managing the enormous unpaid obligations with respect to our pension funds in this state, which hit us every 2 years with this enormous increase in costs. When we set about doing our long-term financial plan, the goal wasn't, okay, we're gonna get massive surpluses that will allow us to save lots of money, build our reserves. That would have been maybe a good objective, although we do need to be always attentive to the sorts of concerns that some students were talking about today. That isn't what we're doing, right? We're not trying to suck out every dollar and then put it into reserves or other things. What we're trying to do is just get through this period with a balanced budget and with reserves being about the same as they are today. And we developed a financial plan that handled PERS, which is a train wreck, in order for that financial plan to work, enrollment must increase at the university. So we put investments in Rogers Shop, and we were getting enormous benefits. You heard about them yesterday. Now, we still haven't been able to move the needle in terms of increasing overall enrollment, because as Roger has been amazingly successful in hitting and exceeding all of our domestic resident and non-resident targets, we are still seeing a decline from previous years of international students. That will stabilize in the next year or two, but that still is affecting us, and we're seeing that in our budget today. And then we have this new development, which is, as we said, a really good development, which is our students are graduating faster. But that presents us with another challenge with regard to revenue. So all of that is our financial picture, which puts us, we don't, as I said, we budget to get to zero, right? And for years we were doing that successfully. Past 2 years we've not been able to do that successfully. We want to get back to that next year or in the future, Let's talk about philanthropy. So we raised already, we announced a campaign. It was pretty audacious. You might say crazy. We announced a $2 billion campaign, more than 3 times the previous campaign, without a president. Okay, there's articles in scholarly journals that say when you're lacking a president, campaigns generally don't achieve their goals. But without a president, right, without a permanent president, we announced the campaign in 2014. We set a goal of $2 billion, which was crazy audacious. We met that goal. We now set a new goal, this time with a president, to get to $3 billion. We are now at, as you can see at the bottom, $2.2 billion. I bet we're there already. We've raised, last year, we had a wonderful year. We had a number of years of over $200 million, and 104,975 donors have given. The overall distribution, we are raising money, not like a school that you would generally think the university, like if you look at, so let's say you look at rankings or you look at size of universities, we are out-punching our weight class by far in terms of how we're raising money. And that is the generosity of our donors, the love of our donors, and we're very, very pleased with that. 67% of all of the gifts that have been made are on the academic side. 33% are athletics, which is where we would like that ratio to be. It includes $373.8 million for student support. 2/3 of the fundraising in that number is for scholarships. We have added an additional $150 million goal for Pathway Oregon and student success in the extension of the campaign. So when we hear students talk about their finances, talk about how they can't make ends meet, we hear them. We hear them, and we're out there trying to make it better. Our endowment, which is still puny by the universities that we have as aspirant peers, is $940 million plus. That is basically a 27% increase during your time in office as trustees of the university. And we want to get to $1 billion. We want to get to $4 billion, but let's get to $1 billion first. All right, now I want to turn to academic and research excellence. So during the search for president, Chuck and Joe came to Chicago, and we had dinner at my favorite restaurant. And we talked about the university, and this is before I was selected. And what was very clear to me, and was the reason that I accepted the job, was that I knew that the board, the number one priority of the board, was academic and research excellence. That was clear from day one. There's been no wavering on this board that that was goal number one for the university. And that's why I accepted the job. And we have achieved a lot together. And it's that consistent, pressure's the wrong word, but expectation of the board that has allowed me and has allowed the vice presidents and the deans to know that's our North Star, is academic and research excellence. So let's start with the Knight campus. That's okay. So the Knight campus, that is perhaps the most visible embodiment of that goal. We all knew what was missing in this university. The faculty knew this before I came here. The board knew this before I came here. Applied research, impact research. We did already great discovery research, but we had no way to have partnerships to apply that research. So it was clear we needed something like this. And so I immediately, when I came here, met with faculty, and we were able, stars align. We have an incredible alumnus, an incredible donor and his wife, who gave us the biggest gift ever made to a public university at the time, and now, still the biggest gift ever made to a public university. $500 million to establish the Knight campus for accelerating scientific impact. We raised additional money, $70 million from the state of Oregon, which we're very grateful for. $20 million in additional philanthropy. We just got another gift this week. Bob Goldberg, the person that we hired, who's a terrific engineer from Georgia Tech, has created a strategic plan, created an advisory board, and they're super enthusiastic about his plans for building the Knight campus. We've hired 4 members of the faculty. We made 4 offers. Each one of those was accepted. That's a pretty good batting average. In addition, we have started an amazing collaboration with OSU, yes, OSU, and with OHSU, both around bioengineering programs for our students and also Center for Biological Data Science with respect to cancer for our faculty and the people of the state. And I left off a bullet there, the building, which is gorgeous, which is going to change the landscape of the city of Eugene forever, is on time and on budget. All right, let's talk about the rest of the university. We have hired, when I came in, I said, we have a goal of hiring 80 new tenure-related faculty all over the university. And we have hired, as of last year, 72 net new positions. When the night campus is complete, that number will be well over 80. And those positions are already paid for through the gift. We also completed the cluster hiring initiative that was begun before I got here. We had, as you remember, there was a process with the faculty to choose the clusters. We ended up selecting 5 clusters: obesity, volcanology, genome function, engineering and sustainable materials, and neuroscience. 16 faculty members were hired into those areas. Very successful. Each one of them is making progress and being tracked by the Vice President for Research and Innovation. We also wanted to see the night camp. We couldn't be a one-trick pony, right? We need to have improvement and research excellence throughout the university. So that we sparked initiatives throughout the university, and we're continuing to do that in volcanology, in translational neuroscience and psychology. And you might just say all of or virtually all of the College of Education, which is our big research enterprise here, perhaps one of the most successful research enterprises in higher education. Our Environmental Humanities program in Cass, our Media Center for Science and Technology that you'll hear about later today, in the Music School, the Harmonic Lab, and in the College of Design, 2 really interesting research programs, the Institute for Health and Built Environment and Urbanism Next, and you all have heard about those programs already. But each one of them is doing great work. And it shows up in our research numbers. Our sponsored research, our research and development expenditures jumped up by 20% over the 5 years that you've been members of the board. During a flat period, right, we were coming off of the recession where there was a lot of money pumped in. During a relatively flat period, we were doing better. In 2019, our new awards jumped 57%. 57%. That's telling you what the future expenditures are going to be. We have done that through incentives. We have done that through, we wouldn't have been able to do that without refurbishing our laboratory space. We have the disadvantage of being in a university which put very little money into laboratories. They're old. They're falling apart. Their wiring isn't appropriate. So with the help of the state, with the help of donors, we've already invested $60 million in renovating older labs. We are building or renovating 200,000 square feet of laboratories once the night campus is done. This is a huge effort. And I understand it's an effort that not everyone can understand, particularly people who are strapped and paying tuition. But the degree, what I would say to those students is, you come to the University of Oregon because you want a degree from a great school. A great school needs to have great laboratories and research, or else you diminish the school and you diminish the value of your degree. How about teaching and curriculum? Teaching and curriculum, we've made major moves forward. We've improved our focus on quality instruction through our TEP program. With the Senate, we have revised instructor evaluations, and the Senate was the lead there. We've established new core outcomes for courses, and now we're going course by course to make sure that core curriculum meets those objectives. Again, that's a Senate thing. We work with them, but it's driven by the Senate as it should be. We have adding new degree programs and minors. We have reduced our student-teacher ratio to 17-1. Now, some of that is because of a good reason. We've added a lot more faculty, tenure-track faculty. Some of it is we haven't enrolled as many students as we'd like to enroll, which we're going to be doing. We've also launched, as Carol described for you yesterday, the online initiative. Again, particularly University of Oregon, not to get everybody to sign up in the world, but to help our students succeed. Speaking of that, let's talk about student success. But before we do that, let's talk about student access. We have invested significantly in recruitment programs for underrepresented and first-generation students. I am proud of that. You all know, you've heard it a million times, I'm a first-generation student. I've seen what education can do. I've seen the transformation, how I can lead a better life than my parents led, better life than my grandparents. I want all of our students and all of the students in Oregon to benefit from that. So we boosted our scholarship assistance programs to Oregonians by 37%. We've doubled our STAMP scholarship program. We've expanded Pathway Oregon by 40%. And it's not funded. We're using tuition dollars to fund a lot of Pathway Oregon. I think at least 1/5 of it, 4/5 of it. We are now serving 6,700 students. Oh no, we've served a total of 6,700 students since it started. Here's some data. When you compare, 62% of Pathway Oregon students are first gen, compared to 25% for the university as a whole. Same, students of color, 40% are Pathway Oregon students, 24%. It's the right thing to do. It's an important thing for us to do. It's a high priority. Let's move to student success. All of you know I keep talking and talking and talking about this. Well, we've had really good success here. And I wasn't even anticipating how good it was going to be. We've invested in nearly 20 student success initiatives, including a Finish in 4 initiative, where we when I came here, it just wasn't obvious, I think, among students that it was a good thing. Like we weren't talking about 4-year graduation. And so we started saying, finish in 4, finish in 4. We put nudges in the system. So if you registered in a way that you weren't going to go in 4 years, it pushed you back. Advisors all got on the same wavelength with regard to this. We established SSC Campus. We started targeting advising. We enhanced peer advising. We enacted a live-on requirement for our first-year students, which was controversial, knowing that students who live on campus during their first year will grow attached to the university. We expanded our ARCs, we expanded our FIGs, we expanded all of the things to connect these undergraduate students with the university so they would not feel alienated. We removed curricular barriers in areas like chemistry and in math. We haven't done nearly enough there. This is one of the reasons why I'm so excited about the numbers that we've seen. We've improved our support to underrepresented students. So then we move to our crowning achievement, which is Tyson Hall, where all of this comes together in integrated advising, career counseling, and tutoring. And I'll say to you, again, this is going back to what I said at the beginning, it's not all about me. This was a CAS initiative. It was not my initiative. I'm smart enough to know when someone suggests something good to latch onto it. And we did latch onto it. I made a commitment to hire 24 new advisors. And we've seen already, if you jump to the next slide, we've seen the benefit, which we talked about yesterday. We're now at a 60.7% 4-year graduation rate. We're up over the 5 years since you joined the board. we've gone up from 49.9% to 60.7%. Our 6-year graduation rate, which of course is affected before the 4 rate, right, so this is before the board came on, is going up too, but slower, naturally. But the benefits from all this, what's exciting about this is Tyson opened in June. The 24 advisors are just getting there, just starting, right? So we are building in an increase for the future in our students. And so it's just exciting. And the previous slide also included some of the other academic buildings that we have invested in, whether it's Chapman Hall, the Price Library, or the art studios on Olive Street. Let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've made a significant amount of progress there. It is not easy in some cases. We developed the ideal framework. That was already started before I got here. But we put it through the last process, we revised it, and now it's out there. Every part of the university now has a diversity action plan. And I am meeting with every dean and vice president to talk about their progress on the diversity action plan. And what I'm really pleased about is there's buy-in. There's tremendous buy-in. We've started implicit bias training, active recruitment process. We've increased our first-year underrepresented minority population from 27% since you took office to 34%. We are having more problems with increasing our faculty. We can hire faculty of color. We are having trouble retaining them. That is a problem. It's partly a problem because of Eugene and the lack of diversity in Eugene. It's partly a problem that we don't have good enough mechanisms and the resources to do effective retention. It's getting complicated by the Pay Equity Act. And so all of those things are difficult, but we're committed to it. It should be easier to retain than to hire, and we need to keep those people here. And we started with the Senate a new multicultural curriculum requirement. And then, of course, in terms of inclusion, we have the new Lily Reynolds Parker Black Cultural Center, which opened this year. We have an African American speaker series, which is tremendous. We have new residential communities. We have an indigenous student, a Black, and a Latinx, and we have more to come. We have the Black Studies program, which is starting, and we renamed Unthank Hall after an alumnus of our university who's African American. All right, let's move on to student experience. Part of what makes a great university is a whole rounded student experience. Part of that is the dormitories, or we don't call them that, the residence halls. We built Kalapuya Alihi Hall, I've been getting lessons in getting that correct, and Bean Hall renovation, which some of us walked through today. It's amazing. I mean, those buildings are terrific, and they're not just terrific, the rooms are the same size in Bean Hall, right? But it's the public spaces. It's the opportunities for students to take classes where they live and to gather and develop community. We've done renovations of the Student Recreation Center before I came, Student Union, Health Center, Price Commons, and Tyson Hall. Each one of those is activated, because you wonder, why did I put it under student experience? Well, if you walk through Tyson Hall as you did yesterday, or you walk through our the Price Library, those become hangout places for students. During exams, if you look under staircases in the EMU, you're going to see students under staircases because they each find their place. We want our students to find their place at the university. Fraternity and sorority life, that is probably when I came here, one of my biggest worries. And we revamped our entire fraternity and sorority life. I cannot promise you we will not have problems in fraternity and sorority life, but we have better mix of responsibility and accountability than we've ever had. And then, of course, Title IX, all right? I don't need to remind you what this place was like with regard to sexual violence before I came, in terms of our reputation and the basketball player problem, the 3 basketball player incident. Well, Darcy and a lot of people in the Senate, we all got together. We rolled up our sleeves. Again, a lot of this was, the framework was done before I got here. And we have improved our services. I believe we've become a model rather than an example of the worst. And it shows up in the recent AAU climate survey that they did when they found that the incidences of sexual violence went down at the University of Oregon as they were going up elsewhere. And again, you can't sit on your laurels. We got to keep trying to get better. Continuous improvement. Now let's talk about athletics, a subject that is on some of our minds this week. So we have won, since you joined the board, 12 national and 24 Pac-12 championships. We've increased our graduation success rate to 86%, as you heard yesterday, because we believe in student athletes, not athletes. We believe in students, student athletes. And our student athletes have earned 14 academic All-American honors. And, you know, I think we're all extremely proud. I think we all should be extremely proud about Justin Herbert, who yesterday, I believe for the second year in a row, was named the #1 academic All-American. He's up for the Campbell Prize, which is the academic Heisman Trophy. That's what, Friday, I believe? And, or maybe it's earlier than Friday, it's in New York right now. I mean, they're getting ready for it. I mean, he is a wonderful example of athletic prowess, and he came back. Could have gone to the NFL. He came back to finish up his academic work and to finish his last year of eligibility here. It's financially self-sufficient, which when you look at, I go to meetings of other presidents, everyone is pulling out their hair that they have to subsidize 10, 20 million, their athletic programs. Ours is self-sufficient. We provide a couple $1 million for tutoring, and we get $15 million in out-of-state tuition to the general coffers of the universities, as well as assessments for operating expenses to us. I'm not going to kid you, it's fragile. And there's lots of changes coming in athletics, and we're going to have to be attentive to that, and I know you are. And then, of course, the news of last Friday that we're going to the Rose Bowl, and I know a lot of us are very excited about it. I'm excited about the Rose Bowl, but I'm a little bit of an outlier in the sense I like football fine, but actually I like football when it's our team, but no other team. But what I'm excited about the Rose Bowl is the opportunity, and I see Roger shaking his head. We are going to, it gives us a wonderful platform to go to Los Angeles, which is one of our #1 non-resident student sources. And we can see students. We're going to have a huge event there. We're going to do a community service project. We're going to bring deans. We are going to try to get as many students in Los Angeles to come to the University of Oregon. And it's going to be, it is going to be a tremendous opportunity for us to build into our enrollment project this Rose Bowl. And so that's what excites me about it. I also want to win, but for me, the win will be if we get more students than we expected from Los Angeles to come here. Now, let me just finish up with talking a little bit about challenges and opportunities. We hear this every board meeting, we talk about this. We are in a fragile financial situation. We budget to break even, not to put away money. We budget to break even. Maybe after PERS is over, we can budget to build surpluses. But now we're budgeting to maintain excellence, to grow excellence, but also to meet the obligations. And with this state funding where it is very, very difficult. So one of the things that we are going to need to do is, because we can rely on philanthropy to build new programs, but the thing that's hard for some people to recognize, including our students sometimes including our faculty, is philanthropists don't give money to turn on the lights. They don't give money to pay salaries, right, of people who are here. They generally give to build new things. I don't mean build by physically build, although they do that, but they give to build new program. At most universities, you would say about philanthropy, it's the icing on the cake. Our cake has no flour in it because of what we get from the state. So we depend on student tuition. And that's hard. And we heard about it. We hear about it every meeting that we have from our students. So we need to use, what philanthropy can do is philanthropy can help with student aid, which we are doing, and as I mentioned, we've done quite successfully. We will continue to need to make strategic investments in the university. And this is a hard one for our community. It's related to what I was just saying. In order to be the university that the board talked about when I was hired, that Chuck and Joe came to me to talk about, in order for us to be the university we want, in order for us to be the university that Oregon deserves, a nationally prominent, research-intensive university, we have to make investments. We can't stop. We need to make investments in faculty. We need to make investments in laboratories. We need to make investments in our program and in our students. And so we see, and in our infrastructure. And so one of the things that's a challenge for us is you see Tyson Hall go up. You see the dorms, the residence halls get rebuilt. You see the Price Library. And students say, as we hear, well, why can't you keep tuition down? Why can't you take money from that and use it to keep tuition down? And there's two answers of that. Most of the money that's coming for that, for those purposes, is capital, right? And it's either debt from the state or it's gifts from philanthropy. And you can't tell a philanthropist, no, you have to give for this. And what you can't do is when they make a gift for Tyson Hall, or they make a gift for Hayward Field, you can't say, I'm not going to spend it on Hayward Field, I'm going to take it and spend it on something else. That violates the law. And it also, if you ever did that as a university, no one would give you a cent in the future again. So, and that's on me. I haven't been able to articulate that clearly. And I'm not sure I'll ever be able to articulate that clearly. But I need to, because that theme runs through where we hear it. We have to be able to explain to people the role of restricted gifts, the role of restricted capital funding from the state. And that's partly what I'm going to do. And we're fighting, as we work with the state, we're fighting something that is nationwide, which is an increased skepticism about higher education. When I go to AAU meetings, I see polls about people's attitudes towards universities, and we're polarized, number one. Democrats view it entirely differently than Republicans, and the levels of support in both are down. And people are skeptical. And what we need to do as a sector, both nationally, but also, more importantly, in the state of Oregon, is win the hearts and minds of the people that the future of the state of Oregon is education, that the future of the state of Oregon is getting young people to be skilled so they can work in high-paying jobs or well-paying jobs, and research. That Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley because of university research. Seattle is what Seattle is because of university research. And Oregon can be better with research with a great University of Oregon. And we're going to put our minds to that. But, you know, in summary, I just want to say the last 5 years, again, I only participated in 4 of them. We have made tremendous strides forward. I think, you know, if I were a member of the board, I'd be really pleased. But I wouldn't get too pleased because we got a lot more work yet to come. I'd be happy to answer any questions you got.
Are there any questions for?
You have to be mindful of time because we have hard stuff.
Okay, but, so, can you take a couple of questions?
I can take as many as Angela will let me.
She's already whispering about the hook, so. Well, I don't, while somebody's thinking of what they want to ask, great review, thank you. It's really, I sort of got tired listening to how much we've gotten done here, so that's wonderful. Thank you for your leadership. Okay, I think these are subjects we talk about all the time, of course, so, all right, so thank you. Let's turn to our next subject, which is, Jamie, Jamie's ready, I guess. Jamie's going to talk about the tuition setting process, and she's going to introduce the guaranteed tuition idea that we are thinking through and analyzing and trying to make sure we understand. So I have an agreement with Jamie that we're, in this particular session, we're not going to try to get great quantitative detail on the tuition, guaranteed tuition situation, because we've got a lot of analysis that's incomplete there. But we are going to hear, once again, I know we have heard it before, but once again, the idea about guaranteed tuition and what its merits may be.
Yep.
Okay,
And
Jamie,
actually,
and your colleagues are.
Yes, I have a couple colleagues up here. Roger and Kevin are going to help with this presentation. We're actually going to cover 3 topics for you in the next, I think we have about 40 minutes. The first is we're going to give you a process update of just what's been going on with the TFAB process and the tuition setting process to let you know kind of where we are in that sequence. The second is we do have updated information on the cost drivers for next year, so wanted to share with you what that's looking like. And then finally, as Chuck mentioned, we are going to talk conceptually about the concept of a guaranteed or locked-in tuition program. Our main goal in doing that is to see if the board is interested in the president and the Tuition and Fee Advisory Board really diving into this type of program in January and early February. If you are all interested, then we'll have those conversations. If it's not something the board is interested in, TFAB has a lot of work to do, and I'd rather not, spend a lot of their time if that's not something that you would like for them to consider. So it's really to get a read at a conceptual level of, is this something you would like us to ask TFAB to consider? So again, 3 topics, and Kevin's going to start us off.
So good morning. Thank you for hearing with us today, allowing us to visit with you today. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update on where TFAB is, and for most of you, you've seen this process before, but we do have some new board members, so I just want to make sure that you're familiar with what we do as a group. TFAB is an advisory group to the president, and we are tasked with, 1, developing undergraduate tuition recommendations, but also reviewing and recommending the mandatory fees, non-mandatory fees, and graduate tuition proposals each year. There are 18 members, 5 of which are students. We have been very fortunate this year that the 4 meetings that we've had thus far, we've had very good student representation. We probably are averaging about 4 students per meeting, which is always positive. But when you think about student schedules and trying to get them to coincide with the other members of the group, there are 2 faculty members, one that's drawn from the faculty senate, and then there are the remaining members come from all aspects of the institution and different levels, everything from the AVPs and deans to faculty members, staff members who represent almost every aspect of the university. All of the meetings are open to the public, and in fact, we are always graced with the presence of a reporter from the student newspaper. And so the things that we are talking about are obviously very, very transparent going forward. As I mentioned earlier, we've already had 4 meetings, which is pretty impressive since we started in October, and trying to coordinate, again, around student and faculty and staff schedules. The 4 meetings during the summer are really for context, and the president made a reference a little earlier about trying to help students understand where you can move money and use money going forward. So we spent quite a bit of time helping them to understand just how the tuition, fees and tuition at the university are used. You can see the types of items that we have covered thus far, background on the public university support fee, cost drivers, growth initiatives, a little bit of historical and comparative data over the last X number of years so that folks are coming in having a better understanding of the work that we have to do and the numbers that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
One thing I'm just going to interrupt Kevin, I'll add is we did actually, for the first time this year, we walked the committee through the long-term financial projections that you all looked at in May so that they had a better sense of not just the next year of what things look like, but all of those different scenarios of what the future could hold as we're facing the PERS increases over the next 5 years. So the committee did walk through all that analysis as well.
We've had some really good discussion and questions. I think the students that are on the board this year are really heavily engaged and take very seriously the work that we have to do going forward. The winter term will see the heavy lifting for TFAB, and we will have somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 9 meetings over a 6-week period. At that time, we'll review some proposals for fee increases from some of our auxiliaries, from housing, PE and rec, the EMU. We'll look at course fees, and we'll talk again about the undergraduate tuition rates. About 2 weeks in, we will have a student forum, which will allow students in general to be a part of the process, ask questions, get more information. They'll see a lot of the presentations that the TFAB has been looking at and reviewing over the course of the last 3 months or so. That forum is co-sponsored by ASUO, and so we will have some conversations with them in terms of how to lead that and to get a good representation in the room. I think last year we had the best representation we've had in quite some time, with well over 100 students taking part in a very good conversation around tuition and fees. After that, we will make a recommendation to the president, and he will then post his recommendations online, and then he'll host a forum as well. And then finally, he will make the recommendation to you folks at the March meeting. One of the really cool things this last couple of years is that we've been able to upgrade and update our website. And there was some confusion, I think, in some of the previous iterations where I think there may have been 2 websites and some of the information was a little confusing. But this one is very, very clean, very, very clear, easy to navigate. And basically everything that we are doing shows up on this website. Minute meetings, upcoming meeting schedules, the information that we are reviewing, the cost drivers, everything that we're looking at ends up on the website. So if you aren't able to come to a meeting, you are able to still see the kinds of information that we are using to make decisions about tuition and fees going forward.
All right. So I'm going to transition to looking at the cost drivers for next year. I know as you all are aware, because we've done this for a number of years, each year when we're talking about tuition, one question is, well, what costs are going up year over year for the institution that need to be covered? Because if we have costs going up, as everyone's familiar, we either need to have revenue to cover those costs or we have to cut other costs to cover those costs, because while we are operating in a deficit situation this year, we cannot do that year after year after year. At some point, that simply does not work. As we looked at next year's cost drivers, what we analyzed looked pretty similar to trends that we have seen in the past. This slide gives you the dollar figures for each of these items. We are looking at total projected cost increases of about $19 million. Now, do keep in mind that's on a budget that's $550 million. So I'll show you the percent. On a percentage basis, it's something like 3.4%. So you are looking at a big budget. Fairly similar categories to what we've had in the past. The faculty, staff, GE, salary and wages, that figure represents the salary increases per our collective bargaining agreements, as well as an estimate of salary increases for our unrepresented staff. It's very similar to what we've seen in the past. It is slightly higher because some of the contracts were slightly higher, but it's in the range of what we've had in the past. And you can see the number of employees that those figures cover. Again, large dollar amount, but as you all know, almost 80% of our budget is invested in personnel. So you'll see the percentages in a minute. One area we are seeing slightly higher expenses than normal is on the medical cost front. That is because with PEB, we get our figures from PEB. As you know, we're mandated to use the state's medical program, and they tell us what the rates are going to be each December. This past December of 19, we actually saw a larger increase, the 6.5%. That was because there was a medical tax that went into effect a few years ago, and PEB, my understanding is, was able to use reserves for a couple of years to cover that, and this year those reserves, I assume, are gone, and so there's an added increase to our rate to cover that. I think it was in the I want to say it might have been 2.7% that was added on. So that figure of 6.5 includes the annual increase we normally see, this extra kind of cost due to that tax. And then we do see some changes based on the mix of our employees. So obviously family coverage is much more expensive than individual. So it kind of depends on what happens with the composition of our workforce. We are anticipating just a normal size increase next December. And so we're blending those figures to come up with that 2.5. Retirement is a little bit complicated this year in the sense, the good news is we are not in the PERS increase year. So as you recall, with the PERS fund being underfunded every 2 years, there's a significant increase as they charge us increased rates to try to cover that. We are in we're going into the second year of the biennium when rates are flat. There are many things, though, that are affecting these rates this year, and I'll try to keep it at a high level, but if folks have questions, I'm happy to take it now or later. There's basically 3 factors that are affecting us. One is some of the new PERS legislation mandated that we now pay retirement on retirees. So it used to be that if someone retired and then came to work with us, we did not have to pay PERS rates. We are going to be paying PERS rates on those individuals. They're going to be using that money at the state level to cover the unfunded liability, but it doesn't mean we're suddenly getting charged for employees we weren't charged for in the past. That is largely being offset, fortunately, by a reduction in the pension bond debt rate. So years ago, the state issued debt to help offset the unfunded liability. Due to what's going on in the market, they've reduced how much they're charging us for that debt. So we will see an offset. And then we are looking closely at the composition of our workforce as people retire and we're in more expensive Tier 1, Tier 2 categories for PERS and the optional plan. As we hire new staff, sometimes in faculty, those rates are lower. All combined, right now, we're estimating about a $500K savings actually next year. These numbers may alter a little bit as we get more information about some of the PERS legislation, but I certainly don't expect increased costs, and I don't expect anything significant. Institutional expenses, that's increases related to utilities, insurance, debt on academic buildings, assessments, and leases. The biggest driver this year is in the utilities area. We had some one-time cost savings that have been keeping utilities rates a little bit lower, and I don't expect those next year. And then finally, the last 2 categories, $2 million is our consistent strategic investment pot that we do through our budget advisory group process. And then you may recall the state of Oregon issued a multi-step minimum wage increase a number of years ago. We are now getting to higher steps where they're affecting more of our employees. It is still predominantly students that are at that level, so we are seeing an impact to those student wages. Again, all in, it's about $19 million. This slide, I'll go relatively quickly because you have this data and I want to move on to the next session, but this slide gives you a sense of what those figures represent on a percentage basis, which I think is always important because we are dealing with big budgets, and so the dollar amount itself can look very high. You'll see the total increase is about 3.4%, with the largest percentage increase on that medical cost side due to that new tax. And then finally, I've put in some historical information so you can see how these numbers are changing throughout the years. But again, nothing super unexpected on the cost driver side, fairly consistent with what we've seen in past years, although the minimum wage, as that goes up, it affects more of our employees, and probably we will continue to see that affect more employees in the future. So, any questions on this stuff before we move on to the guaranteed tuition concept?
Any questions, or I think we're ready to go on, Jamie.
Okay. So then I'll just say before I pass it off to Roger, who's going to start off with this, that again, this is a very conceptual discussion. Our goal here was mainly to make sure that we're using TFAB's time effectively, and if the direction from you and the president is this is something that we should consider, then we'll absolutely take the time to ask TFAB to look into it. If it's not something you're interested in us considering, then obviously we'd give that direction to TFAB. So, Roger.
Okay, good morning. We have, it's okay. I'm going to give you an opening to the concept of guaranteed tuition. And for those of you that were on the board a few years ago, you know this is an item that has always been of interest to a few of us, and I certainly fall in that group. We've had some terrific discussions, and so our session today, this is an overview of the presentation, and it's really a concept that we've been exploring. When we looked at it a few years ago, we went down a path for a while, and then we decided, well, maybe not. I've been really excited that we're back in this area. I think members of Jamie's team have done some incredible modeling around this that you'll see to maybe address some of the financial concerns that we didn't get into last time. But here's the framework for what we're thinking about for guaranteed tuition. Each entering class, we'd set resident and non-resident tuition on a student credit hour basis. The rate would be guaranteed or locked, set for a fixed number of years, and that's really important. We would set it at a 5-year window, enabling students, while the president's goal is for students to complete in 4, and we want them to complete in 4, we do have 5-year programs, and we thought there could be an opportunity for students to have an additional year if needed. The key point here, we're fixing the cost. Fixing the cost. Students will know the full and expected costs of their education before they decide to come to the University of Oregon. I want to take just a moment to talk about that piece. I think that's a really powerful tool for the University of Oregon. I think it's important to tell families and students what their cost is going to be. And to be in a position where we could say, this is your cost for the next 4 years, actually aligns us to the rest of society, right? We read in the research all the time that the second largest investment a family will make is in higher education. That assumes if they own their own home. If they don't own their own home, then it is the single largest investment they will make. And this would enable us to tell families and students, this is what your cost is going to be, as opposed to the fluctuations that we might see as we move through. I also just want to emphasize, I think this moves the conversation with families actually away from cost. Right now, we spend a lot of time in recruitment talking with families about what's it cost today, what's it going to cost next year, what's it going to cost 4 years from now when my daughter or son is completing their degree. I'd rather talk about all the great academic programs we have at the University of Oregon, or the new things that are being introduced, or the night campus. There's so many things that we would love to be in a position to kind of move cost to the side a bit. And I think this enables us to do it. I should, well, that other line kind of doesn't show there. Oh, I didn't touch the button. Thank you, Jamie. So, I mean, this is, you all intuitively know this. With guaranteed annual tuition, that's the blue line holding steady over the 5-year run, and we're calling it floating in this particular example. Tuition currently tends to increase over time. And so the advantage to students and families is that we're offering a powerful tool that helps them budget and plan effectively. I want to highlight a few of the advantages that we've talked about with this plan. First, the financial predictability. I've already said it, but I don't think it can be said enough. This is a significant investment for families to send their students to the University of Oregon. If you're a non-resident family, our cost of attendance is running $53,000, $54,000. That's a $200,000 plus investment. My colleague, Vice President Andreasen, that would be a significant donor in his world. And so families that are contributing and sending their students here, this is a big investment. And I think guaranteed tuition offers them peace of mind. It enables a family to plan and to effectively think through all the commitments that are going to unfold over the next 4 years. There are times we talk about families that we see currently in our admissions process that it's heartbreaking. We dealt with a family this past summer, police dispatcher, Oakland, California, making about $58,000 a year. Their child is coming to the University of Oregon on a Pell Grant, $6,000, roughly a gap of about $45,000. We can talk about it often, and we do, and Jim Brooks's team does in financial aid. But I think sometimes it's hard for families to see what that's going to look like over a 4-year period. I think this enhances that and enables people to know what they're doing. Big fact for us, it protects the value of the scholarship. So every scholarship that we award to students in a guaranteed tuition model, the buying power is constant and consistent. When the cost is fixed and the scholarship amount is fixed for 4 years, your buying power remains the same. Additional advantages, recruiting. Now you're going to get into the thing that is a big one for us. I think there's other reasons to do this. I want to be clear. I think we should be heading in this direction anyway as a way to be transparent and upfront with families. But from a recruiting standpoint, we believe this will be very strong. Every recruiting cycle, we hear from families that the University of Oregon out-recruits others. We hear that very often. It comes to us throughout the entire cycle. This tool, oh my goodness. I think it becomes a very big game changer for the University of Oregon. We've looked at our competitors that have guaranteed tuition. Jamie will show you a slide, and I might jump in when that slide comes up, even though it's during your part. I don't think they've maximized or leveraged this tool as far as I think we would if given the opportunity. Certainly supports our growth initiative. It's a big boost to retention. You know, I think the slides that the president shared earlier, I was about to stand and applaud. Show me another school that's moved graduation rates that significantly in that short a period of time. I think guaranteed tuition only adds rocket fuel to that rocket. It will enable families to take the financial pressure and move it to the side. When students stop out or drop out, they always give us 3 reasons for why they're doing that, right? Academic, that's really not an issue here. We don't have students that are failing. Social or financial. I think the social is actually a proxy for financial most times when you survey students. It's a lot easier to say, I didn't fit at the university than I couldn't afford it, if you're talking to someone. So I think this creates a stable and predictable tuition rate that should help with retention. Campus climate. Guaranteed tuition, in my view, changes every discussion. Every discussion. It changes this discussion between students and families. I've covered that ground. It changes the discussion we have at the university. It changes the discussion that we have here with the board. It enables us to remove cost and tuition and resetting price constantly for the same group of people. It removes that, and I think that enables us to have different kinds of discussion. It removes a major stressor in our students' lives. I think this program would enhance campus climate. So, a few things that we've talked about conceptually. I mentioned this one earlier, locking in the rate for 5 years for all students. Students would enter a given year, whether they're a freshman or a transfer, and they would pay the same guaranteed tuition rate. So you start in 2020, whether you came from Lane Community College or, Sunset High School in Portland, you're paying the same tuition for the next period of time. If a student takes longer than 5 years, we've done a lot of thinking about this one. In their 6th year, they would move to the cohort that followed them. So if you start in 2020, you're not done in 5 years, you go to the 2021 cohort and what that fee would be. The best part of this program, in my view, is it encourages and incentivizes completion, which is what the president's primary mission has been since the day he arrived. And this program actually incentivizes people to complete. We're going to control the mandatory fees. One of the things that we've, there we go. One of the things we've talked about is we don't want this to be a tuition guarantee only. We need to put the mandatory fees in as well. So that when we're talking to families, mandatory fees and tuition are locked in, and we don't end up where there's all these exceptions or caveats. Although now I'm highlighting one area that would be slightly different, and that's the fees on a course-by-course basis. It would be ideal to provide this for all students on campus. Some schools have tried to opt in or opt out. That's not anything that our small group has been interested in. This is beneficial to the current students, and so they should be included. In fact, I think if we did not include our current students, we would have a problem. And I think it'd be hard to kind of look ourselves in the mirror if we were offering guaranteed tuition and we didn't do that for the current students. Implementing a multi-year differentiated program for existing students, that would complicate things beyond what I think any of us can imagine. The goal of guaranteed tuition is to simplify the cost piece, not to complicate it. We should not end up like Delta Airlines, where 180 people on the plane are paying 175 different rates. I don't think that is the way higher education should operate, and our group has not thought that. So the goal has been, how do we, no offense to Delta, how do we simplify the cost piece of this and make it less confusing? I think that's the way you do it. We would consider whether it's possible to implement one final tuition increase for all existing students. And here's the piece of this that I think our group conceptually wants to spend a little more time thinking about. What do we do for the sophomore, the person who's a freshman right now, if we're moving to a guaranteed tuition concept next year? There has to be some sort of increase. Moderate, obviously, but then let's lock them in too, so that they're in the same position where they're going to pay the rest of that the whole way through. And I think current students would benefit tremendously from the program as well. The concept, how we do it, it needs to go through TFAB, obviously, and I really want to compliment Jamie and Kevin on chairing TFAB. When that group started, Brad Shelton and I chaired it starting 9 years ago, and it sort of grew. I remember when we added students, that was the first time they were on the committee. And TFAB plays a critical role on our campus because there's so many stakeholders. And so, as Jamie said, if this is a concept that people like, you've probably got the sense, I'm a big fan of it. I think it would give the University of Oregon competitive advantage. That's the recruiter in me. I also think it's the right thing to do as the costs of higher education have increased. But I don't think they want to pursue it in TFAB if it's not a concept that would be worth pursuing. So with that, I'll throw it to my colleague.
So we have just a couple more slides to talk about, and as Roger said, there's a lot of work to do if this is something folks are interested in terms of understanding exactly how the program would work and the rates that we would be looking at. There is a big risk that's associated with this program, and so I don't want to not spend a little bit of time talking about that, which is this program is essentially, if we moved forward with it, it's like an insurance contract for the students. It's basically saying regardless of what happens on campus, whether we have cost increases, whether the state cuts our budget, we are not changing your tuition rate for those students who are here. And so what that means is that if we face a significant issue like a significant cut to our budget, we have less flexibility than we would otherwise have in the short term. In the long term, you have the same amount of flexibility as students move through the program, but in the short term, the only tuition rates that you are considering is what is the rate of the incoming class, those folks who haven't made a decision yet whether they're coming here or not. And so we've done some initial modeling to look at this. Obviously, the numbers are going to depend on where TFAB lands in terms of recommendations. But there's no question that if we were in a program like this, in the short term, it would take us more time to come out of a challenging budget situation because essentially all of the students on campus, those revenue streams would be locked. Those tuition bills would be locked. Again, it's like an insurance program. So it does raise the issue that in an ideal world, if we move to a program like this, you would want to have some reserves built up so that when we hit that situation, if and when we hit a state recession, that we were able to recover. And so it raises the question of, well, where could you actually get this funding to establish a reserve fund to help with that type of situation? There are at least 3 places we've thought of. There could be more. We haven't. This was just some preliminary brainstorming. One is at the very beginning of the program, you do actually see a bump in revenue because you're bringing in students. The new students are coming in and they're prepaying essentially their tuition for 4 or 5 years. So you could take some of that prepaid money and set that aside. Again, dollars are going to vary depending on what TFAB's looking at. This is something we could potentially fundraise for. This would be a tremendous program to get our students onto a situation where they don't have to face tuition increases every year. I have to believe we have some donors out there that would be excited about helping us to transition to a program like this. And so that could be another area. And then finally, we could consider whether, in addition to looking at the tuition rates, that we add an extra charge to the tuition rate that is essentially paying for that insurance in terms of the reserve fund. So those are at least 3 options. There may be others, but just thinking about that at the front side of this. I'm actually going to turn this back to Roger because he clearly had more to say about this slide than I did, and his team did the research. But I will say I talked with the CFOs at the University of Arizona and University of Colorado at Boulder, both who've had programs for a number of years, and they both have seen very positive impacts from these programs in terms of recruiting and campus climate and the discussions that they've had.
So I mentioned yesterday the top 3 importers of students from the state of California are the University of Arizona, the University of Oregon, and Arizona State University, in that order. And I made the comment yesterday, we may have closed and taken over the top spot as it relates to Arizona. When you look at this chart, the top 2 schools that are listed, University of Arizona, University of Colorado Boulder, those are the top 2 competitors to the University of Oregon for non-resident students. And that's been the case basically since I got here. So we purchased from the clearinghouse, where do our admitted students go if they don't come to the University of Oregon? In the state of California, those 2. Across all non-residents, still those 2. So those are our top 2 cross-apps and competitors. And I think, I gotta be careful how I say this. I think they do a good job in promoting their guaranteed tuition plans. I would love to see our team get a hold of a guaranteed tuition plan and how we might educate families and utilize that tool. Dare I say well, I'm not going to say it. I think we do some things that would be, would make sure all families knew about this program long before they sent in an application.
So that's good. I'm grabbing the microphone back. Just in terms of next steps, this is the last slide to give you, again, a sense of where we are in this process. We're in December. It would be helpful, whether it's in this meeting, after this meeting, if you have feedback for the president as he's considering what direction to give TFAB, if any, in terms of what he'd like them to consider and think about. We then would provide, TFAB's going to start rolling that first week of January, and Kevin and I have looked at the schedule, and it is true with the new schedule, we probably will end up having 7 to 8 TFAB sessions plus a couple student forums. We're going to be meeting on a very regular basis, looking at a ton of things. But it'd be great if we had a sense when we launched those meetings of the direction that we were giving them in terms of how, it could range everything from please, don't pay attention to this topic to we'd really like you to consider this topic so that we can have those discussions. We will have TFAB meetings all through January and actually early February this year because the board meeting is later this year, which is great. It gives us more time for more meetings. But the president is going to have to, TFAB's going to have to get recommendations to the president in the middle of February. And then the president's going to have some time for community input, feedback, student forum before getting recommendations to you all for March. So we are under a tight timeline, so it would be great to know, but again, we'll have lots of meetings with TFAB and a good chance to discuss whatever direction we end up going. So.
Are there questions for Jimmy? Yeah, Peter?
So as a parent of college students, I see a lot of appeal in this kind of thing, but I'm curious why you think more universities aren't doing this elsewhere? As you look at I know you had a list, I don't know if it's a much longer list where people do, but why aren't more people going that direction?
Right. It certainly could be a longer list. We tried to find just a sample of schools that look similar to us. This is a heavy lift, and it's a big change in the way people think. And I think conceptually for us, Jamie's team deserves a lot of credit, because I think the biggest thing that most universities can't sort out is what do you do when the inevitable downturn comes? And because you essentially have students paying up front for their next 4 years. And so I think that's what prevents schools from moving in this direction. I do think there's a number of schools, particularly among our peers, that are thinking about this. The last 8 years, I've chaired the Chief Enrollment Management Group of the AAU, and this has been a topic on our agenda the last 3 years, basically, because we're all trying to figure out how can we do things to make college more affordable, how can we be more transparent with students and families, but I'll let Jamie speak to the rest. I'm sure she has other ideas, but I think that's what it is the sorting out the downturn piece.
Yeah, I would say two things. One is there's far more institutions in that list. I believe there's hundreds of institutions across the country that are doing it. And I believe, the last I'd heard, that the UC system was considering this actually, and their board was going to meet on it, I believe, in their January meeting. So I think there are more groups looking at it. I do think there are questions that you have to look at in terms of where your tuition stands today, how much flexibility you have in pricing, all those kinds of things that do come into play. And obviously the crisis situation is one that you have to think through pretty carefully, and we would do a lot of modeling around that. But I do think more and more schools are considering this, so is my sense.
Jennifer?
I'm finding this discussion a whole lot more compelling than last time, and I'm not exactly sure why. How would you characterize the difference from the presentation last time?
Want to go first on that one?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that we've had more time to take a step back and to really think about the program and think about the parameters and do even more research on other schools and have a sense of, if we were going to move forward, what would the parameters of this program most likely look like? And, my hope is that by doing all that research ahead of time and then bringing information to TFAB, it'll put TFAB in a better position in terms of analyzing it and having a discussion. So I think that helps quite a bit in terms of where we are. So,
and you used
I would just add.
You used the phrase prepaid. You don't really mean they're prepaying.
No.
It's so I just want to make sure the language gets there right. So.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Basically, if you think about it, and we'll try very hard to help make this clear for students and others, I mean, essentially, costs are going to go up every year. We have, you've seen the cost drivers. There hasn't been a year yet when I've come to the board and said, great news, there are no cost drivers for next year. Those are natural things that are happening, and in a lot of ways, they are higher than inflation, but not that much higher than inflation. Because the tuition is fixed, essentially you're fixing it at a level where students essentially in the future are not going to see increases related to those increased costs. And so we have to keep that in mind as we do the modeling on the finance side.
With the fees that the student discussed, and you talked about mandatory versus course by course, how much might an average student expect on the course by course that would, cause her to come back and be really concerned about this?
Yeah, so course by course fees do vary quite a bit. We have a pretty rigorous process around them, though. So a school can't just say, I'm going to implement this and they're done. Basically, there's a whole proposal process. We require we ask for documentation of what the costs are. Typically, what those are for are things like consumables, like you're in an art class, you're using clay. Sometimes there are things like field trips. And we try to very carefully, music instruction when it's one-on-one, those types of things. All of those go through an approval process called the Special Fees, Fines, and Penalties process. And what we end up doing is we have a whole book that we look at of everything that's being proposed. I have staff go through it. I go through it. Anything that's course-related that's large, we then actually take to TFAB and highlight for them. We'll be doing that. I think that's actually scheduled our first week in January. So they have a chance to weigh in if there are particularly large increases that people are proposing. And then we open up that binder, we have a public hearing on it, ASUO has a chance to look through it. So we try to have a process that's transparent and open about what people are proposing. And there's lots of questions that go back and forth on, well, what's this fee supposed to be covering? And, what type of costs have you seen in the past, et cetera. So we do have a pretty rigorous process. And in the past, we actually have said no quite often to course fees, just to let folks know, and pushed back on those. So the one thing I would say as well is we are, well, I'll leave it at that. So there are fees that are, there's just components of classes that are more expensive that are covered by course fees. But we do not see there are some schools that are known for having gigantic, course fees where course fees could equal tuition in a given, period. That is not the environment that we're in.
When you say some schools, you mean some
Other
universities,
universities.
not
Not here.
like the School of Journalism?
No.
I think Alan
I
has
wanted
a
to add
question,
one.
too. And then Ross. Go ahead, Alan, then we'll get
I guess
Ross.
I've got two questions. Listening to President Schill earlier talking about the dependency of our revenue and as a university on tuition, and then secondly, the fact we are on an edge. And going to this type of program, it certainly exposes us to a lot more risk. And in saying that, I would say that this idea of putting together a reserve fund or something like that would be absolutely critical, I think, because we get an unexpected downturn, and for our ability to recover, it'd be pretty difficult. The other question, this is kind of a Hail Mary, dealing with HEC, I would think this would be very, very interesting. Do they have, I don't want to be depreciating, but do they have the ability to understand and deal with this type of approach to tuition?
Yeah, I think they can. There is, Western Oregon had a program that was a little bit different than this. It was an optional program, which I would not recommend. So they had some students on a guarantee, some students not on a guarantee. But when HEC looks at tuition, they do look at it for different, when they're kind of assessing how much we fall under their direction, they are looking at it on a weighted average. So they have the ability to analyze it and look at it based on which tuition increases are affecting which populations of your student groups. So I do think that they're in a position that they could take their framework and apply it to something like this. So,
Ross, you have a question?
I agree, Alan, that this exposes it to risk. I think Jamie's done a good job to quantify what those risks could be, and therefore I provide a testimonial, I guess. I'm a parent of a child who attended one of those schools with 4-year guaranteed tuition, and it was very appealing to us. I would agree with Roger, they didn't do a very good job of selling that up front, but once we got there and recognized that, it was very appealing to us and gave us comfort as we went through her career. So,
are there other, Laura Lee?
I guess thinking about one of the comments we heard earlier, how would we ensure that students and their families have all of the information so there's not like hidden fees or, my sense is it would probably be better than what we have right now, which is a lot of hidden fees and concerns about, the unknown nature of how much things are going to increase in the future. But how would we do that comprehensively in a kind of a one-stop, go here and really figure out how much everything's going to cost? Because I think that's really critical. Otherwise, it doesn't give a student or family that assurance.
Right. That would be the part I think we'd be most excited about, because I think we could share what the total cost of attendance is going to be for a student. We'd be able to provide that over a 4-year window, and we would be able to do that through every possible way you can imagine. And I think, so whether it's direct mail, email, social, web, in person, I think it really would give us an opportunity to distinguish ourselves. And a couple things I think would be very appealing. It's not just that the cost is fixed. Suddenly now, your buying power remains the same. And I think that's a critical piece that we would talk about very often. If you're a Summit Scholarship winner at the University of Oregon, the buying power of that Summit Scholarship decreases in year 2, 3, and 4. That would not be the case now. And so I think the kinds of conversations, the way that we would promote it, we would certainly engage central communications. We would want to blast this from every mountaintop we could find. And it would be, I just think it would be a very big game changer for us. The other thing that I think is critical, and it got to the earlier question of why are we better prepared this time, I think several of us have been looking, and the marketplace is changing. It's moving. When it's Colorado, Arizona, and now you've got the University of California system thinking about it, if they went, I certainly, wouldn't want to follow them, but if they went, I think it would change this discussion here. I mean, that's a third of our freshman class is coming from there. We would have to do something, I might assert. So, I mean, as we look at the marketplace, it's moving, and we need to be nimble. And but communicating to families what a guarantee would be and what's included and what's not, I would relish the chance to do that, because I think we could do it in many ways that would ensure families know exactly what we're offering.
Jamie and Roger, it would be helpful to the board, I think, if you could go to one of these, or a couple of these schools, maybe perhaps it's Colorado and Arizona or somebody else, and get them to share with us the data that what did they do as they adjusted the next year's cohort tuition, and how did those, how did each of those curves play against the first one? So I think some data on their experience would be really helpful for our board to see. And the second thing that would be, I think, really helpful would be to get from them what they said to the parents and the students about the program. I'd just like to see how, maybe they didn't do it as well as I think, Roger, you think we could do it, but I think it'd be helpful for us to see how they explained it. So those two pieces of information, I think, would be very helpful to us as a board.
If I could address the second part of your question about how we get information out, the other thing that we have to be concerned about are our current students. And so I think the fact that TFAB is made up of students, faculty, and staff, we've got to sell that here. And when we do the forums, for example, if that's why we have to get this kind of decision early so that we can embed it into the conversations that TFAB is having about the impact of a guaranteed tuition model. Those folks then go out and they have conversations with their peers as well. And so I think we've got to make sure that we're also taking in consideration the students that are here and how they're going to be impacted as well.
So this
Joey,
is
I'm
just
sorry.
undergrad, right? Not graduate student, and this applies to international students as well, the part of the non-resident.
Joe, you had a question?
Yeah, yes. Follow up a little bit on your questions, Chuck. First of all, I think this is intriguing, and a second bite at it, I think you've answered many of our questions that some of us had in round one, but I think it'd be good to get the complete list of those that have guaranteed programs and continue to learn from them. If we're going to do it, let's be best of class and see what else is out there, not reinvent the wheel. Secondly, I guess, and you've talked around it, but Roger, we know you're the greatest recruiter of the University of Oregon and nicknamed Head Duck by us, but to your comments, in particular to the U of A and Colorado, how do you think specifically we can leverage it better now than they are?
Right. So our team and I did a pretty deep drill down on Arizona. We didn't look as much at Colorado because Arizona was more recent. And I want to be really clear. I think they do great things at the University of Arizona. Absolutely. So this is not, I think they do a fantastic job. They just introduce it later. And they're, in my view, they're not, it's kind of like a scholarship. If you don't offer a scholarship in November or December and you offer it in June, well, you've just confirmed a decision. You have not impacted a decision. I hate to say a lot of this. I don't want to give too much of it away. But, I mean, in my mind, I think the competitive advantage is to be there early, which for this first class we probably won't be. If we conceptually do this and we get through and we decide we want to do it, we're going to be coming late in the spring. But the opportunity to talk about this up front And by upfront, I mean to freshmen, sophomores, juniors that are out of state considering where they might go. The competitive advantage we could have in terms of saying, this is your cost. Imagine the kinds of conversations we could have with families wherever they reside early in the recruitment process, which then enables us to talk about what it is the experience is like when you're here. And it's a lot less about how are you going to pay for it. We're being more direct and transparent about that. So there's a lot more I could say about that one. I just think I have great confidence in our team that we could take this tool and utilize it in a way that we haven't seen done quite as much as I maybe anticipated when I talked to the folks. That's all.
Sure, go ahead.
So Jamie, it sounds like this could, if it was approved, this is something that could take place for this next incoming class? Are we structured for it? And Roger, it sounded like there's a little bit of competitive criticalness right now. So we want to jump on this quicker than the UC schools and...
Yeah, I guess I would answer that two ways, and then Roger might jump in. TFAB, if TFAB looks at it and puts together a recommendation that we should move forward, I think it is something that we could implement for next year. And that would be, again, I think there's a model there, although TFAB has to review it and decide if that makes sense and at what level and what rates. But I think there's a model there where you could lock in all students, not just new students, but existing students. I think the challenge, as Roger said, is we might not see any big impact to recruiting the first year because he's not able to tell people that happens until after we get through the TFAB process, we get through the board process. But, in future years, I would assume that would help build in terms of momentum of what we're doing. So.
And rest assured, we would take what is our typical financial aid package that goes after the board approves tuition. And, if we were moving down this path, we would revamp that in advance, and we would try to get as much leverage out of this change for 2020 as we possibly could. But it'd be a bigger impact probably in 2021. The marketplace, I don't know what the UCs are going to do. They're just looking at it. But as we say in our organization, anytime something comes out of California or something happens in Sacramento, it's going to impact us. And so we better figure out how that impact is going to play out. And that's kind of what I was alluding to.
Any other questions? Mike, you wanted to?
Yes. So I guess one of the things is this, we're going to be in the process, fairly quick process of TFAB, and then me making a recommendation to you with respect to tuition. I guess what I wanted to just get a sense of, if I could, I realize this is early, is this something that, because it's a lot of work if we go down this road, because we have to think about, how we would structure it. Is this something that the board feels it is worth pursuing for us to be moving in this direction without committing anything? And we've told the students that we're not asking you to vote today on anything. But just a sense of whether, because if this is a non-starter, we can save a lot of work. Jamie's got a lot to do, and so does Roger. But if this is something that you think is promising, then we're certainly happy to
Why don't we just go
put
down
in the
the
work.
road? Jimmy, let's start with you.
Absolutely, yes. This is very exciting.
Peter?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yes, the devil's in the details.
Yes.
I do too. I think the only other piece that we are not talking about is the research on not only the pros and how to roll it out and so forth, but also the obstacles, what they had to go through and the challenges and what we could learn from that so we could possibly avoid it. But other than doing the research, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. We're looking at pros and cons for all of it, but I think that's part of what the dive has to be next. I think it's really exciting.
Andrew?
Yeah, I definitely want to pursue looking into it more and learning more about it.
I would agree, but I would sort of second, I think, what Joe said around making sure we build some reserve for rainy day.
Agreed.
Well, I'm in favor of it with those reserve requirements, and I think we need a very clear structure. I can just imagine sitting here looking at next year and the pressures that we have on keeping costs down, and are we really treating the university, ensuring that trend line? And I think it's going to take a lot more discipline on our part than probably what we've had in the past.
I think we should move forward.
I think it's worth us looking at, yeah. I mean, I think the answer's in the details, of course. I mean, I'm anxious to see the model of the economic model that explains it, so. But it is, as you said, it's going to be a lot of work. You've already done some, but there's a lot ahead.
Yeah, and I think this will be good in terms of sharing with TFAB kind of the, for the president to be specific about kind of the types of things that he'd like TFAB to give him advice on and look at and analyze and make recommendations, because TFAB will need to dig into this quite a bit. So.
I do think it will require multiple exposures with the board before we get to where we want to vote. Probably because we're slow learners, but I think it's a complicated subject, so.
Yep.
However you can plan the time accordingly. Okay, anything else, Michael?
Nope.
I think we're going to go to our lunch meeting now. Call the meeting to order again. I think we're all here. Okay, let's, I think we're here. Yep. So we're going to turn now to the resolutions and seconded motions from the committee actions yesterday. First, we'll start with the FFSC. And Ross, do you want to handle that?
Sure, thank you. We have a resolution on page 34 of 97. This comes forward as a seconded motion from the Finance and Facilities Committee. Recall that last quarter in September, at the September meeting, we approved the project to build a new residence hall. This resolution is only to approve the issuance of revenue bonds to actually fund that construction project. So I'd also like to add there were some questions raised earlier today about the process used by which we went from earlier discussions, say 2 to 3 years ago, about just renovating housing projects as opposed to now proposing to raise and then rebuild housing projects. When Roger and his team took over responsibility for housing, he did a thorough review of our direction forward, came up with his recommendation to build new housing projects. I'll go back and ask him to document the process he went through for that so that we can all see that. But I remind you, this is only approving the bonds to fund the project that was approved last quarter. So it comes forward as a seconded motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay.
And I declared a conflict on the
Yeah,
last.
carries over.
Resolution carries. And incidentally, it's a good example of when we do hear comments in a public comment session that are somehow none of us could answer. We got some homework done during the day that helped us decide whether we really misunderstood something or not. I think we're fine. So the second item is a seconded motion from Executive and Audit Committee. And Peter Bragdon, you get to do this one.
Yeah, and I think everybody was here yesterday when we talked about having the 3-year terms and it being time to appoint the officers, and Chuck and Ginevra were willing to continue to serve. So I don't want to talk too long or you may take it back. So I'm going to, we should proceed with a vote and lock you in.
Okay. So we have a motion, a seconded motion from the EAC on the election of 2 officers of the board. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I think I'm going to say nicely done, Peter, but I'm not sure.
Nicely done.
And then we have next, a resolution relative to, two things relative to President Schill. One is, which I will go through, one is the bonus recommendation that we as a board have made. And Ginevra and I both thought this, while it could have been done in committee, we thought this was appropriate for the whole board. So we'll go through, and I think we'll take a roll call vote when we're through this. But I just want to make a few remarks to remind us of how we arrived at this recommendation. When we structured President Schill's compensation package, we did this considering two or three things. One was we decided that we wanted to try to index his total compensation opportunity, whatever the components of it were, to the midpoint or the mean, whatever we knew enough about, of comparable AAU publics and the Pac-12 public schools. So we looked at those kinds of data, and as you know, we discussed it many times with the board, and then part of approving his contract, we indexed him in that regard. And we think that's, you know, people could debate that, but we think that as a board, we thought that was the right place to land as a target compensation. And then the question was, given that's the target, what is the structure of that compensation system? And some of us, probably because of our corporate backgrounds, as diseased as those may be in modern America, thought that the best way to do that was to have part of the compensation as salary and part of it as bonus that could range from 0 to something else. So that if we had a year where performance was, for whatever reasons, might not be just his performance, could have been the environment, could have been 12 other things, that we thought we just couldn't justify any bonus, we would go to 0, and that would index him down under the benchmark that we had set, the midpoint benchmark. By contrast, if he had done, as he seems to always do, great things, and his performance had to be really good, we would have quite a bit of upside room. We said we could go up to $200,000 to reward that differentially good performance. So it's one part of this was setting the range. We indexed that to peer schools, peer presidents, and the other is the structure of the compensation. So we did that. Then the board sets goals each year, as we all are involved in, and some of those goals are goals that we realistically expect President Schill to achieve in that year. Some of them are things that we're not sure he'll ever get achieved, but it might be 10 years from now before we know whether he really was successful in some of these things. On the other hand, those are the goals that are important to the university, and we go through a process, you'll recall, of we draft those goals, we each get a chance to edit or add to them or subtract from them. We sit with Mike and go through those goals. And just in case there's one that's absolutely not realistic, we haven't ever really had one of those yet. So the $4 billion, we're testing the theory with the $4 billion. But as I've said to Mike, if you only get to 3, we'll still consider it a victory. So we go through that process, and Exhibit C and Exhibit D in your material show the goals for 2018-19 and 19-20. And I would say the one change we've made for next year is we've tried to focus more on fewer, more really fundamental goals. So you can see that reflected in those exhibits. Our objective in setting his target compensation, where we did relative to AAU publics and Pac-12 publics, is that we believe that it is that kind of school, if anyone wants to try to steal President Schill from us, it is that kind of school that might try to do that. So you could think of a Cal or UCLA or probably not Ohio State, given their football situation. But at any rate, so that's how we arrived at that group. And we looked at all the package, housing, support for insurance, compensation, bonus, we looked at all the structures. We then conduct a 360-like review of Mike's performance every year, where each of us get a chance to comment and evaluate and share our evaluation of him. We also get that kind of input from all of the officers and the vice presidents, the deans, and a variety of other people. And then we go through the process of sitting with Mike, and Ginevra and I go through line by line, and nothing is left unsaid. I mean, I think it's not a pure 360, but it's pretty good, and it's a rigorous process. And so we go through that. And we did it again this year, as always. So when we thought about using all the data we had and et cetera, and you heard Mike's presentation today about his view of the 5 years, it's hard to imagine that, I think we heard from the AAU review that they couldn't identify any other school that had made as much progress in as short a period of time as we have under Mike's leadership. And some of the things are just wonderful. He talked about the money that's raised. He talked about the new academic programs. You know, we hired a Nobel laureate physicist in there someplace. We've hired a bunch of new faculty that are terrific, a lot of new deans, and a lot of that happened this year, and the $255 million raised this year, of course, was wonderful. So I think it checked all the boxes. Mike pointed out, and I think it's really important that we recognize this and remember it. While we're doing this with respect to evaluating Mike and whether we should pay the $100,000 bonus, Mike said, and it's correct, that many other people made attainment of these objectives possible. So it wasn't a Mike Schill show alone, and some of those people are in this room, and many of them aren't, but they were fundamentally instrumental in the success. When Ginevra and I sort of debated about what it should be, I think I could have made a case for more than 100,000, given how well it had done. But I thought, in respect to the financial challenges we face as a university and the state's financial challenges, and that something more in the middle of that was more appropriate. That's not I didn't arrive at that in any scientific way, but just sort of, it seemed right to me. So, and Ginevra agreed with that. So, we've all had time, I think, to review. You got a copy of the contract in your package. You've had lots of chances at the evaluation. You know the goals. I thought it was timely that you gave the 5-year review today, Mike. So the resolution is that we approve a performance bonus of $100,000. And I don't think we need to, do you want to say anything else?
No, well, maybe, just to second it. I mean, the evaluation process for the last number of years has been so positive that I've had to dig to get anybody, not even to say something at all negative. It was like, well, give me something to work on. And, you know, when I think back about the last 5 years, our big thing with the initial contract was retention bonus. Is he going to stick around? I think of this car 5 years ago where there were maybe one lug nut on each wheel, and the engine didn't work very well. And I think it's all put back together and going down the road. And I think that this last year has been a superlative year, and we're only going forward.
So unless anyone wants to add to it, I would ask if anyone, oh, okay. Yes, I'm sorry, Catherine left a note for us to read.
So Catherine, trustee Catherine Wishnia apologizes for not being here. She's taking another final. So she asked if we could read this on the record for her. Hello, fellow trustees and the public. I am writing my comment regarding the proposed bonus, $100,000 bonus for President Schill. I respect and understand that the board finds that Schill's performance to be on par, if not above, other Pac-12 colleges. However, I don't find this should be the only qualification for a bonus of that amount. I believe there are several better ways to utilizing $100,000. We could invest in services that help us feed and support the thousands of students facing food insecurity every day. These students often only eat one or less meals a day to afford to attend the UO. I do not believe President Schill has done enough to truly help students in the areas they're asking for help in. These include food insecurity, housing, mental health services, and low-cost parking options. We cannot sit on the sidelines as trustees and let students continue to experience these barriers while we toss more money to those who already receive a large salary and other benefits. As students, we scrape by every day to survive, so using that $100,000 in other areas that truly benefit students and student services would actually be supporting your policy of student success. You cannot believe in this concept of student success if you are not willing to sacrifice a bonus to help students continue their education and success at the U of O. Thank you, Catherine Wishnia.
Okay, and so it's read into the record, which I think is appropriate. Unless anyone wants to say anything else, I'd ask if someone would move adoption of the resolution.
Move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any other comments before we vote on this? Okay, so let's take a roll call vote. Angela, can you?
I can, and I will start with trustee Carey, who moved the resolution.
Yes.
Chair Lillis?
Yes.
Trustee McIntyre?
Yes.
Trustee Murray?
Yes.
Vice Chair Ralph?
Yes.
Mary Wilcox?
Yes.
Catherine Wishnia is absent. Marcia Aaron?
Yes.
Lonnie Balmer is absent. Peter Bragdon?
Yes.
Andrew Colas?
Yes.
Alan Ford?
Yes.
Joe Gagne?
Yes.
Elisa Horniker?
Yes.
Okay, the resolution carries. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
And I think we ought to ask you if you'd like to say something.
Yeah, just very, very briefly, just make two comments. First one is I just want to thank you all for the vote of confidence in me today. I've had a wonderful experience here, and I think the past year we've had some really terrific achievements. I just want to reiterate something that you're now hearing for the third time today. I said it, Chuck said it, I'll say it again. Everything that I am accomplishing as president is really based upon the work of other people. And again, many of them in this room, we have a tremendous team here at the University of Oregon. Everyone is hungry for us to get better. Everyone is committed to the sort of ethic that caused me to take the job 5.5 years ago, which was that we want to be a university that excels in research, excels in academics, and is graduating the next generation of leaders in the United States and the state of Oregon. So I want to thank all of them because the vote of confidence that you express in me today is really a vote of confidence in them. I also want to just say, as all of you know, last year you gave me a performance bonus, which I then used to establish Pathway Oregon Scholarship in memory of my mother, who had died a year prior to that. As all of you know, my dad passed away a couple months ago, and what I intend on doing now is making an equivalent donation to another Pathway Oregon Scholarship in memory of my dad. My dad grew up in the Great Depression. His dad died when he was 5 years old, so he had to go to work. and support his mother and his sister. And so he never had an opportunity to go to college. And he always told me, my earliest memory of my father was saying, you know, you're going to go to college, you're going to go to college. He had a particular college in mind, which I didn't get into, but we'll let that go. But in any event, you know, and I know he was extraordinarily proud that I graduated college, went on to law school, and was absolutely delighted that I became president of the University of Oregon. Used to always ask me questions about the University of Oregon, about you all, about Phil. And so it was, I know he, wherever he is, he will be, well, obviously he's up there, but that he will, he'd be very proud. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And there's one other piece of work to conduct relative to President Schill, and that is, and this is in your book as well, there sort of slight contract amendment, slight amendment to the contract.
It was actually in the resolution you voted on.
I'm sorry?
It was actually in the resolution you just
Oh,
voted
it was? Well, thank you for supporting it. Let's talk about it for a second, though. It really deals with, you know, Angela just, you know, she won't let us talk about half what we want to talk about, and then she sneaks stuff into the resolutions. That's terrible.
Let's take that off the record.
So this amendment dealt with how President Schill would be managed as a faculty member if he retired as president and joined the faculty, which we would be thrilled if that transpired at some distant future point. And it really deals with the role of the provost in managing Mike in his new role, as opposed to the role of a dean doing it. So, and it's, I think it clarifies some things that we just didn't deal with at all in his contract. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
I should have known that. Okay. All right. So let's go to the next thing. Juan Carlos, why don't you and Ellen come up? And this, as you know, you all know Juan Carlos, but this is, and you know about Ellen Peters. She's new to she's back as a duck. And they're going to talk about the Media Center for Science and Technology, which is a very exciting center. And this is, as we do in every board meeting, we have an academic area in focus. Welcome, Juan Carlos. The show is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to introduce my colleague Ellen Peters, who is a returning doc. She has significant roots here in the state, same her family, and she came back to Oregon on September 1st to become a field night chair, professor, and director of the Media Center for Science and Technology that is hosted in the School of Journalism and Communication, but with the intention to be an interdisciplinary center. And you know, you have Ellen's biography and great accomplishment in your packet. So I want to highlight a few things that we couldn't really get a better person for this position, because she is truly an interdisciplinary scholar. She is going to help the SOJC to further bridges across the university. And this is important nowadays for any type of discipline. So I'm really happy that we end up with Ellen. She was part of a very competitive pool of applicants, but she stand up since day one. And she came and she took the interview process very seriously. But most importantly, she has taken her membership in the School of Journalism and Communication really seriously as well. She has taken the time to meet with the faculty to really understand the scholarship of the SOJC and the potential. She has a passion for mentoring junior faculty members, and she's already doing so, collaborating with junior faculty members and making sure that she transfer her amazing knowledge in terms of grant development and securing grants, and also developing a scholarship that is very relevant for today's complex society. In fact, if you go and use Google Scholar, she has more than 25,000 citations. But in addition to that, she's a public scholar. So you can, she have been in the Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquiry, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, London Times, U.S. News and World Report, National Public Radio, Free Economics, and so forth and so on. So again, this is the type of scholar we need the most today, interdisciplinary in nature, that really takes seriously her mentorship role, but in addition to that she's a public scholar that can really transfer amazing knowledge into the world, into practice. So without further ado, I want to introduce you to my wonderful colleague, Ellen Peters.
Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be at the SOJC, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I appreciate you guys inviting me. And I can't tell you how thrilled my husband and I both are to be back on the University of Oregon campus. We do have a strong family history at U of O, and it's nice to be a Duck again. In an ideal world, science becomes knowledge for citizens that allows them then to make evidence-based choices about topics ranging from climate change to medications. Also in this ideal world, the knowledge goes further and it impacts policy. Unfortunately, we know today that doesn't always happen. Today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own research in this vein, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about our plans for the MCST, the Media Center for Science and Technology. Science, of course, often produces numeric information. It produces numbers. The numbers might be the expected number of inches of sea level rise, for example, or it might be the acres of damage from a wildfire. It could be the numeric chances of a catastrophic side effect from a prescription drug. As a result, making evidence-based decisions for the public and for scientists to make evidence-based decisions often involves the use of numbers. Much of my own research in recent years has involved this use of numbers and involves a concept that we call numeracy. Numeracy is like literacy, but with numbers. You can even think about it as simply math ability. Numbers are ubiquitous to science, but not all people can understand and use those numbers effectively. In fact, 29% of US adults can do only very simple processes with numbers. They can count, they can sort numbers, they can do simple arithmetic, and they can use simple percentages like 50%. But they can even only do these processes if there's very little text and minimal distractors around the numbers. This lack of understanding has a variety of implications for people, including in health. Innumeracy has health consequences. Imagine that you take this medication. The bottle says to take 1 tablet 1 hour before a meal or 2 to 3 hours after a meal. Now imagine that you usually take the medication at 11 a.m., but you forgot today, and now it's 12 noon, you're happily eating your lunch, and you have to figure out what's the earliest time you can now take your pill. Seems pretty easy, and for some people it is. It's also a little bit of an ambiguous question if you think about it. But when a nationally representative survey of Americans was asked this question, the researchers actually accepted a variety of answers. They accepted 2 p.m., 3 p.m. They even accepted 2 to 3 hours later. Nonetheless, about 40% of Americans couldn't figure out when to take that missed medication dose. This is a numeracy question. It's also an important question because about 70% of Americans take at least one prescription drug every single day. More than 50% of us take 2 or more drugs every single day. Being innumerate affects people's lives. One person told me, I miscalculated how long a prescription medication would last. I ran out of pills and I ended up very ill. Another person told me I'd been diagnosed with cancer. The test result numbers were very confusing and I simply felt scared. And these, by the way, are smart, educated people. The first person has a PhD, the second had a master's degree. They just happen to be low in numeric literacy. So not surprisingly, numeracy affects how well we understand numbers out in the real world. But it turns out it's important for another reason too, because it affects how well we make decisions. People who are less numerate tend to make worse decisions when numbers are involved. You might recall that Angelina Jolie made wrote in the New York Times about a very numerate decision that she made about her breast cancer. She found out that she had a faulty gene. She actually had 2 faulty genes. That meant that she had an 87% lifetime risk of getting breast cancer. She did not have breast cancer yet, but she thought long and hard about the numbers, and she thought long and hard about what they meant for her and what they meant for her children. And she ultimately decided to have a preventive double mastectomy, despite not having cancer at that moment in time. She made her decision like a highly numerate person. People who are good with numbers tend to seek out numeric information. They think hard about those numbers, and they think about what they mean for the decision that's at hand. Now, most women's breast cancer risk is not nearly as high as Jolie's happened to be. But for the less numerate, numbers are more difficult. They're harder for people. And the less numerate tend to neglect or gloss over numbers when they're making decisions. And instead of using the numbers, research shows that the people who are less numerate tend to be influenced more by their emotions. They tend to be influenced more by compelling stories that don't really represent the numbers that underlie what's going on in that person's life. They make worse decisions as a result. And in fact, after Jolie's story, a very emotional story, became public, what ended up happening was that even women who are at average risk for breast cancer were much more likely to choose preventive mastectomies that had no known survival benefit for them relative to other non-invasive options. The less numerate's lack of comprehension of numbers and their poorer decision-making ends up ultimately it seems to end up as a risk factor for them. That seems to accumulate over time, and it ultimately results in them actually being less healthy. So people who are less numerate adopt fewer protective health behaviors, like exercise, like protecting against HIV. They're actually 40% more likely than the more numerate to have at least one chronic disease, and they take 20% more prescription drugs at the same time as they're less able to follow complex medication and other kinds of health regimens. They also end up in the hospital and emergency room more often. Much of my research these days is focused on numeracy. It's not all that I do, but it's a lot of what I've been doing over about the last 10 years. I have a book coming out in the spring if you're interested in more. It's called In Numeracy in the Wild. And the Aspen Institute just selected one of our papers as one of their best ideas of the day. So what we have is a numeracy and scientific illiteracy. We have misinformation, truthiness, and fake news. We have poor decision-making and poorer outcomes. But what we also have is a nascent science of science communication, and that's what I'm here about today. What we need are stories about the numbers. We need to merge data and story for greater impact. We need to understand better, and we need to have information that's presented effectively, and because ultimately we need people to make evidence-based choices. Here at the MCST, we want to become a leader in this science of science communication, and we believe that we can. Our goal at the MCST is to advance research in science communication and better connect science with the public. Doing so will help us to improve individual and policy decisions. It'll also help us to increase personal as well as societal welfare. Our ongoing plan is to address complex problems in health as well as in the environment by capitalizing on the SOJC's unique strengths in journalism, in advertising, in public relations, strategic communication, and creative storytelling. We have an opportunity through the MCST and also a palpable excitement across campus for the science of science communication and knowing how to do this better. In partnership with SOJC and other U of O faculty, we can facilitate understanding as well as use of science across a variety of audiences. If people also find that science useful, then we believe we can also catalyze its usefulness. Our vision at the MCST short term includes developing interdisciplinary and collaborative research, as well as external funding, and we'll do so by building bridges within as well as outside the SOJC. Medium term will focus on experiential learning for our students, and we'll focus on outreach and engagement, including science communication trainings. Long term, we'll look towards sustainability and obtaining diverse money from tuition, from more grants, as well as from donors and broader development efforts. MCST research is interdisciplinary. It is intended to be so. We can and do connect with other scientists on campus as well as off campus. For example, on campus, we already connect with the Night Campus, the Data Science Initiative, the Institute for Sustainable Environment, as well as psychology. There are other examples too. Off campus, exemplar collaborators include the U.S. Geological Survey, Shake Alert Oregon, the Northwest Fire Science Consortium, the University of Pennsylvania, the Veterans Administration, and the National Cancer Institute. Our research also connects with problems faced by Oregonians and faced by others in our nation. I told you a little bit about my research in numeracy, but many MCST exemplars exist. For example, Holly Smith is examining message effects for early earthquake warning communication. At the same time, she's providing an excellent experiential research learning opportunity for one of our graduate students in developing science in this critical topic for Eugene and for the Pacific Northwest. In the Healthy Oregon Project, Autumn Schaefer is helping to meet project goals to provide the public with feedback about their personal cancer risk, while at the same time to provide OHSU scientists with data to advance early detection and treatment of cancer. She's doing so as their main communication strategist as well as manager. External funding is, of course, critical for the ongoing research productivity of the MCST. It is also critical for the operating budget and the reputation, of course, of the University of Oregon. Personally, I've been continually funded on federal grants since 1998, and I'm looking forward to building up the grant profile of the MCST and the SOJC. We're currently building up the grant infrastructure. We recently hired our first grants administrator at the SOJC. Through the SOJC, we're also mentoring and supporting faculty, and particularly our younger faculty, so that they can grow into their best as researchers. Grants drive research and reputation through publications and also through impact. Consistent with U of O being an AAU R1 research institute, we've already been funded by a number of agencies and will continue to do funded high-impact research that earns our faculty peer-reviewed publications, fellowships, as well as awards. One goal of the MCST is to attract and train students for high-tech communication careers. Thus, we're also going to be student-focused. Although we're initially focusing on research excellence, we have an unprecedented opportunity to build on innovative academic linkages across campus in experiential learning. These educational connections, in turn, will be critical for research success because teaching and research go together, and it'll be critical for our research success in the science of science communication in particular. We'll continue the work started by Deb Morrison, Mark Blaine, and Holly Smith and others, for example, through the award-winning Science and Memory program. This is that takes place in Cordova, Alaska, and other locales. This will also include building students more and more into research, resulting in future research careers for some of our students, and being better citizens for all of them as they learn more about science and they learn more about how to communicate science. Third-year public relations student Nate Main, for example, worked with an MCST faculty member to analyze Oregon media coverage of wildfire and smoke since 2013. These findings will assist researchers who are working to understand the science communication dynamics about wildfire and smoke issues in the Pacific Northwest. We're also going to build out our curriculum in science communication to allow us to train SOJC as well as other students at all levels in research and dissemination of effective communication processes and messages. We're starting to build out our public engagement activities too. Some of these activities are going to be student-focused. For example, on January 24th, we're actually going to hold a climate science game night in order to help out one of our SOJ students to test a new game that he's designed. Other activities are going to be more research-focused. So in February, we're going to host our first inaugural Science Communication Research Forum. We're doing so in order to model and further encourage effective interdisciplinary projects and collaborations across campus. The Data Science Initiative and the Night Campus will co-sponsor this event. We'll also engage SOJC as well as other U of O faculty and students by bringing in external speakers who will add to our repertoire of questions to ask and tools to answer those questions. Kathleen Hall Jameson from the University of Pennsylvania will give 2 talks in March. On March 10th, she's going to speak about her book, Cyber War, her analysis of possible Russian interference in the 2016 election. The Wayne Morris Center will co-sponsor this event. On March 11th, she'll talk again about the science of science communication. She's one of the leaders in this field. Co-sponsors are the Knight Campus and again, the Wayne Morris Center. And then finally in April, we'll continue our science communication work on wildfire in a symposium that's held at the University of Oregon. We want to be able to give science away by communicating better about it. We want to give science away, for example, through public-facing pieces about our research. We also want to be able to give science away in ongoing faculty as well as graduate student workshops. Our Associate Director, Mark Blaine, has been conducting workshops for the Knight Campus, for example, teaching them how to tell better stories about science. We're also giving science away in external workshops. Mark Blaine, for example, has already given one workshop to a company here in town called Thermo Fisher Scientific. I've been working with a group of cardiologists from the American College of Cardiology to figure out how they can teach their physicians to communicate better about risk, how to communicate risk better to their patients. Long term, we can't give away our science communication trainings for free, though. We're currently developing a business model that will allow us to connect science better with the public in a sustainable manner for our center. I'll wind up by saying that modern science is amazing. Scientific innovations have meant tremendous improvements in the quality of people's lives. But when the rubber hits the road, it's human beings who ultimately have to make the decisions. It's human beings who have to make the decisions to use science effectively or not. People are the ones who perceive the risks and benefits of a new technology or not. They're the ones who support policies, act on climate, make decisions about whether to use a new technology, get genomic testing, or even maintain their health. Many of these decisions relate to how well people understand, engage with, and ultimately use science. Key to all of this is evidence-based research. Evidence-based research on communication and on enhancing public science literacy as well as interest in that science. By learning more through communication research and practice, we can engage people more effectively to think hard and to learn about science and technology. That's important for our future. Ultimately, we can help people understand and use that information effectively to address some of society's most pressing issues. Thank you very much.
Wow. Questions?
I'll start with the question. So I have two questions, and I think they'll probably end up getting related as we move through. Number one, excited to have you here. I was excited about your leadership of the center. I was excited about the center when Juan Carlos first came up with the idea and talked to me about it. But one of the questions that I have is the problem of science communication or science comprehension or numeracy comprehension different in kind from other fact versus emotion discussions? Or is it just a variant of that? Is there something special about science as opposed to other incidents? Because and I'll give you about half an hour ago, I had a conversation with a board member, and we talked about some of the conversations that went on in the lunches and that we had today. And there was the discussion was about how no matter how many times you say something, emotion's going to win, as opposed to fact. And I'm interested in whether science is different from that, because this wasn't about science. This was just about accepting a fact. And then I guess the second question, which is related, is what research program are we going to do proactively to change that, right? What is the research to take steps to solve that problem of the failure to comprehend?
Yeah, so let me address first. So your first question was, is science communication special? I'm trained as a psychologist, and I believe that everything gets down to psychological mechanisms. And some of those psychological mechanisms are, of course, emotion. Some of them are understanding or not understanding numbers. There's a whole variety of mechanisms that you can think about. Science communication is, and understanding of science is, of course, governed by a lot of those same psychological mechanisms, so that we're going to see similarities across many different fields. So in my research, for example, I do research in a lot in health. So I'll look at how rheumatoid arthritis patients, how we can communicate with them more effectively in order to help them understand why their physician wants them to go up to a higher level of a medication. I then might do a study looking at financial outcomes of Americans, because there's some similar psychological issues involved. This is not a bug, it's a feature of science communication. Because what we can do at the MCST, and what we can do in general as researchers, is we can take advantage of knowledge that is learned in other fields, other applied domains, and we can take it into whatever pressing problem we're dealing with at the moment, and use that science effectively. It has to be torqued a little bit for the particular domain, but I have, for example, taken research done in breast cancer, and I've used the findings there to help us figure out how do we more effectively help people understand what's the scientific consensus on climate change. I can explain that further if you want, but there are absolute parallels there. And it has to do with how people process numeric information and how they respond emotionally. And so I guess my response is science communication is special in the sense that it's complicated. It's one of the more complicated things that we need to be able to do, and it's one of the more important things that we need to be able to do. It is often based on numeric information. Math is sort of the science of, math is sort of the language of science. And so numbers in particular are important there, but it's not the only place where numbers are important. It's not the only place where emotions are important. So I would turn your question and suggest that it is similar to other domains, and that's a feature. That's an important feature that we can take advantage of to look at the building up of cross-disciplinary knowledge, so that if I learn something here, I also learn something about this issue over here. So that's the first answer. In terms of a research program, we will be focusing on pressing problems. I think that research can have its best impact when we identify a problem that matters. So in Eugene, for example, wildfire is a problem that matters. And once you can identify a problem that matters, you can start to poke at, well, what's going on there? How is it that people are making decisions? How is it that they're taking in information or not taking in information? And we'll be building research programs around those kinds of problems. It will sometimes be in wildfire. It will sometimes be with lupus patients, for example. And then we're going to be looking across our various strands of research at how can this strand of research help this one over here in order to, again, try to build up a larger body of knowledge.
Have you, there are many cases where the message is intentionally made complex. I mean, think of healthcare, where you can read radically different claims about a phenomena in healthcare because it's two different organizations intentionally are trying to shape knowledge of the science or the transaction or whatever. Does it always require data? I mean, can you deal with it just in logic?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So essentially, in health and even in other areas, do you actually need to provide numbers? I think is your ultimate question. It probably depends on the problem. I've looked at this in a couple of domains, and the numbers were actually necessary, or the numbers were helpful. Let's say. Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's take the medicine as an example. We did some research. I chaired the Food and Drug Administration's Risk Communication Advisory Committee for a couple of years. And one of the things that kept coming out on the committee was that the committee members wanted the Food and Drug Administration to require the provision of numeric information about the risks and the benefits of drugs. So what is the numeric likelihood of this side effect and that side effect? What's the numeric likelihood of the benefits? The FDA pushed back on that. And one of the reasons they pushed back on it, one of the main reasons, was because people who are less numerate don't understand numbers. And so therefore, if we provide numbers, it's going to disadvantage this huge, unfortunately, huge swath of our population. And I thought, okay, well, less numerate people don't happen to know numbers very well, but they're also not stupid. And let's go find out. Let's see what happens. And so we did some research. We actually did a large nationally representative experiment, essentially, where we assigned people to get information about medications in a numeric format with the chances of the side effect, or in a non-numeric format, the way it usually is done. And that is what we do right now. We usually just tell people a side effect is very rare, for example. What we ended up finding was that when you provide people with the numeric chances, the people who are less numerate are more likely to overestimate the risks of drugs, which suggests that maybe we shouldn't be providing them with numbers until you look at the other half of the experiment. And then what happens is everybody, so if you think about when you provide them with numbers, the less numerate overestimated at about this level, the highly numerate at this level. If you don't provide them numbers, everybody overestimates at about this level, and they're far less likely to be willing to take the drug. And so in that case, we actually had a very strong answer that provision of numbers was important. I would say, though, that it's an empirical question. We probably don't always have to provide numbers. I have to say, when I've looked at it, particularly in medicine, it's helped. The same thing's been true for people understanding the consensus around climate change. You can use logic and just verbiage, and you can say that a majority of climate scientists, a grand majority even, of climate scientists believe that human-caused climate change is happening. It makes a difference, though, if you tell them the numbers. And so I think ultimately, though, it's an empirical question. I think it depends on the domain. It's one of the things that I find personally as a scientist interesting to study, but I also find that it has some important implications.
And so here's the problem.
Yeah.
Our student body have a very difficult time understanding the budget of the university and what it's about and why it is the way it is, even though Jamie does a great job of explaining it to us. And it is complicated. Is that something that you can approach?
So I've been doing some research recently looking at budget numbers around federal spending with some people at Carnegie Mellon. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how can you help people understand numbers that are just so far outside of our evolutionary experience that
way outside their experience.
Way outside, that they're tough. So things in the hundreds of millions, the hundreds of billions. I cannot say we've been very successful yet. We're continuing to poke at it and trying to figure out ways of using metaphors so that people understand the numbers better. So trying to make comparisons of, you know, if you have a million versus a billion, I don't remember what the translation is, but you can talk about that in terms of a number of seconds versus a number of days. So you can look at different metaphors where you try to compare these incomprehensibly large numbers with something that's a little more everyday. A more common example of this, it doesn't get up into the hundreds of millions, but if you think about calorie counts on food, you can tell somebody that a cookie has 350 calories, or you can tell them that it's going to take 90 minutes of brisk walking to walk off those calories. Those have very, and that number is not quite correct, by the way, so please don't correct me, but it's something like that.
Bingo!
And it's a surprising number of brisk minutes of walking that are needed to walk off this abstract number of calories. And so those are the kind of things we've been trying in the millions and billions. We have not been successful yet. Those are tough ones. Those are just numbers outside of our experience.
Juan Carlos, I could envision this as a student project.
Yeah, definitely.
Of course,
And this
I'm
is
not
ideal
sure
also
how
to
the
engage the
politics
students.
will be.
And probably we need to do the same for faculty, only to students.
I was going to say, if you come up with answers, please contact me. Let me know.
I'll get right back with you.
I'm curious, when folks are not as numerate, can you identify, is there a point in their development or education where they missed a certain level of help, and can you make that up later, or is it just more challenging if at that developmental stage you didn't capture those concepts?
So are you asking about the developmental stage where they suddenly
For
just
numeracy.
end up not being, in terms of
more of a
numeracy.
question of almost, where would you be investing in the educational system? Would it be pre-K or elementary, or can you help people all along the way, and it's just a question of providing that support?
So I'm going to start with the more political question, which is, it's important all along the way, including in college. However, I have to say we get the biggest bang for our buck with little ones. You get the biggest bang for your buck in pre-K, or in those early years of kindergarten. there are just different processes that happen across schooling. And, kids start off we think, or at least from what I've read, we believe that kids start off about the same in math, and then things happen. They have better education and teachers. They have worse. They have, for female students, but not for male students, they might have a female teacher who's anxious about math, and that teaches the girls, but not the boys, to be more math anxious. They might have a parent who's math anxious who helps them with homework, and that then translates. There's a whole variety of processes that can happen. I can tell you we've been trying to do some research, we have been doing some research with adults, trying to look at, because we have an adult population. You don't want to give up on a huge swath of this adult population that is really incredibly innumerate. So we've started off doing some research in college classrooms. We usually take advantage of like a statistics classroom or maybe doing something in a calculus classroom soon. And what we do is we assign college students in the class to a psychological intervention that we think is going to help to prop up their confidence in math so that they can learn more across the course of the class. And then we take a look at, well, what happened to their confidence? What happened to their numeracy? And then for me, because this is what I'm interested in, what happens to things like healthy behaviors? And so we were able to show in one study, for example, that we were actually able to improve their numeracy, protect their numeric confidence. The kids who are not in our psychological intervention, their numeric confidence nosedives across the course of the semester. It's a hard class. Most important to me was that we're actually able to support their healthy behaviors from the beginning to the end of the semester. And we're also able to improve their financial literacy from the beginning to the end of the semester, where the other students went down. We didn't do the intervention. So you can help even with adults. I should add here, though, the effects are small. We're trying another study in a statistics classroom starting in January, where we're going to look at trying to combine together a set of different interventions that attack different parts of the psychology for why someone might not do well, and we're going to hope to ramp up our effect sizes. We'll see what happens.
Are you talking about stereotype threat?
That's one of them. Yeah, so we'll use like a values affirmation. We'll use a whole series of, there's some interventions now where if students who teach other students about things, they themselves learn the most. It's the teachers who are learning the most, just like the professors for that matter. So we'll use a whole series of different directed abstraction, if you know that one. There's a whole series of interventions. Yeah, I'd love to chat about it more if you'd like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Ellen or Juan Carlos, since we've got you here? Well, this is fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said earlier, I think there's a lot of opportunity for you.
I'd love to hear about any ideas you have. Yeah, it's been great to be here. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed not just being back on campus, but also at the SOJC. We've got some tremendous scholars, and I'm really excited about some of the potential for virtual reality and for gaming and some of the other really interesting and novel ways that we can start to intervene in people's lives on important topics. So thank you, guys.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Juan Carlos.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any other business before we go to see Jimmy and his? Okay, so let's adjourn this meeting.